Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the British Transport Police Authority on the 1st of October 2024. Could I ask that you have phones switched to silent so we don't get disturbed by incessant ringing and all the rest of it? And apologies, Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies today from Nick Hawkins, BTPA member, and just to flag that we have a number of Teams participants in the meeting, so as well as your member colleagues Amir Faisal, Fiona Brunskill, Ian White, we also have Kenneth Trey joining the meeting momentarily. We also have online attendance from Sam McCulley of the TSSA and also Stuart Cowan of BCP Federation. And we have a number of members in the public gallery, both from the BCPA executive, also Shanez Chaitan from Department for Transport, and Chris Horton from the Superintendents Association. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Quite a full house this morning. Are there any declarations anyone feels they need to make? Okay, thank you very much. Let's turn our attention, please, to the minutes of the full authority of the last meeting, which should start at page 4 in the pack for those who have the pack indeed. And as usual, I'll go through the minutes page by page. If anybody has any comments or points they wish to raise, could they please shout out? Page 4 is the cover sheet, so I don't think there's anything there. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9, page 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and that concludes it. So can we take those minutes as read? I look to my colleagues on the authority. Approved. Thank you. Actions from previous meetings is the next item, 3.1. All of the actions previously are listed as completed in the papers. Does anyone have any points they wish to raise in respect of any of those actions? Thank you very much. Item 4 then, strategic risk. I think, Rubeela, you're dealing with this?
Yes. So the risks have already been to the relevant committees. And just to give a bit of an idea as to some of the changes from the last quarter that came to the authority. Following the development day in May, we have been looking to incorporate more operational impacts into the risks that we present to the committee, and also looking from the horizon scanning that we did in May, incorporating those as well into the risk assessments. You'll hopefully also see a new addition to the risks, the bottom left corner, and here we're trying to bring out indicators, various reports, assurances, which hopefully will help inform members around where the risks are and why we're going to the risks that we're in terms of the target scores, etc. In terms of deep dives, we've already completed the financial sustainability deep dive, and by year end we're still looking to do the partnership, cyber and health and safety deep dive. And going forward, the next piece of work that we'll be doing around the risks is to look at the joint ownership on the risks and incorporating some of the controls that BTPA does, especially around financial sustainability and legitimacy, and also incorporating more around the operational impacts of the risks as well. Other than that, if there's any particular questions about the risks, happy to take them.
Stuart, did you have?
Yeah, I'm mindful of the fact that Nick Hawkins isn't here, who chairs People and Culture, but on legitimacy, which is the ownership of that committee and PDC. So first of all, on the issue of suspended and restricted duties of of officers. Obviously, that data is somewhat out of date now. It's 3 months out of date, and I just wondered if we might be updated on it, given that it said both these issues, the two separate investigations, should be resolved within Q2, which is sort of about now, I think. But the other wider point, Chair, is that that all 7 linked risks are not red, and they are significantly lower than the assessment of the risk. While the risk scoring was reduced as part of the deep dive, a decision was taken to retain the scoring as red. So if we're sort of evidence-led, why are we on red for legitimacy when the collateral indicators don't indicate that that is the score that is the correct score?
Can you come back on that, Rubilo?
The risk deep dive, I think, was done towards the beginning of this calendar. It was in last financial year, from memory. It is something that we can obviously look at again. I think there are obviously other additional controls, etc., in place. I think a lot of time with the risks, you want to actually see those controls in practice before you would necessarily then look at reducing any scores. And I know that's something that we're looking to do on the financial sustainability, where we have had a risk deep dive recently. We want to see those risks and the controls in practice, and then there'll always be a bit of a lag with the actual scoring until you see whether they've been embedded.
But the deep dive did find that progress was being made across all 7 of the contingent risk factors, and yet a decision has been made by someone to keep it at red. It's not a question of a value judgment on that particular issue. It's just, are we following the evidence is the bigger question.
Well, I should give way to Tricia, but I would say, so it was the full authority that decided to keep it as red because we had a discussion about it after the deep dive, but it was a few months ago. But I also do note that the other committee, which looks at this risk, is in the note of the meeting, might have been a point Tricia was going to make, said if we don't see the evidence by November, we need to have a kind of urgent out-of-committee look at this because, to be fair, members raise this issue fairly routinely, and I know that the Deputy has sympathy with it.
Yeah. Do you want to, Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, Hugh's covered the point I was going to make. This has been discussed by members and other committees, and there's a disparity between the scoring and the assessment and the residual risk, and I tend to agree that the activity that's gone on should reduce that residual risk down to a more realistic level. In addressing Stuart's point on the suspensions and restrictions, there's reference in here to 2 large WhatsApp groups. Only recently we've made a decision on one of them to send a majority of that group to gross misconduct hearings, so those figures should reduce slightly. A number of the officers have gone to misconduct hearings, and the other one I'm still finally assessing with the IOPC, so there should be an outcome for that next week. So overall we haven't seen an increase in those suspension and restriction numbers beyond the last set of figures that were provided. They should come down slightly over the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you. Tricia?
So Hugh's said exactly what I was going to say on the legitimacy risk specifically, but I do think there's a point that if, on all the risks, that if the scores aren't moving and the action plans are static, then we need to kind of draw a line under that, as we've done with the legitimacy risk, and I think it's a good idea. Having said that, I did want to reflect that there is some modest dynamism in this risk register compared to what we've seen before. And I am pleased to see some movement in the residual scores. And I'm particularly pleased to see some upward movement in the target scores, not because I necessarily am taking a view on whether those are right, but I think we have reflected around this table that that our target scores may have been realistic as a set. So it is good to see evidence coming to the full authority of those being considered and reflected, and some changes being made to that, which I think is what we want. That's the quality of the conversation that we want the risk register to drive.
Paula?
Building slightly on Trish's point, really, and also with the benefit of the excellent breakfast briefing we had on cyber and data security. Just looking at the column that says next 1 to 3 years, everything is either going down or in 2 cases, remaining static, which suggests we're thinking that the world is going to be a more benign place over the next 1 to 3 years, which I think is unrealistic of us. And I understand that we should properly reflect within that progress that we're making. But I also think we should be realistic about some of these risks, I think, are going to be, the external environment is going to be so challenging, so dynamic, and so much dynamism and drive within those that we simply can't, at this point, say that it's going to get more benign, and I think cyber and data security particularly. So to the extent to which this is a way of us saying, what are the things we need to really focus on, because we can see them going up our relative risk register in terms of things that are likely to get more hazardous as an external environment, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about a down arrow against cyber and data security.
Probably, I think it's a really good point on the cyber and data security issue. We know that the cyber threat, sort of nationally and internationally, is growing. Public sector and law enforcement are becoming more targeted in that realm. There's no doubt about it. I think the current risk assessment shows the efforts the force are making to get ahead of the curve. Right. So we've done a hell of a lot of work recently around protective security in that cyber realm. Certainly from our incident response, our exercising and testing, our upgrading of IT and data security, and of course in the recent national assessment of our cyber readiness, cyber threat readiness, we were well above the national average. We've still got a long way to go, but actually we're trying to keep pace with the threat that is growing out there. But I think it's a really good point. There is the realism that we add to this, and whether we actually keep pace with it through upgrades, investment or not is another question. But
I think it would be prudent to assume that we won't be.
Yeah,
just by virtue of our size and the fact that we're one country, and this is a global threat. I think it would be wise for us to accept that the external environment is going to get more challenging, and reflect that in our view of the next 1 to 3 years.
Agree.
Can I say, I think there's also, probably if I duck back into legitimacy as well, there is a crossover between legitimacy, cyber and data security. So particularly when we're talking about confidence, trust and legitimacy of communities into policing, I don't think that we've been strategic enough in terms of recognising that security of data, which people entrust us to protect, actually, and often have no choice as to whether we have their data or not. So I think the problem is that we can always see and feel the risk of cyber and data. It's less tangible in terms of legitimacy for confidence and trust of communities in policing, and I think that we've got to get a greater balance between the two areas. And the exponential threat from cyber and data feels very real, but I think a mistake that policing often makes is that we don't feel sometimes the decline in trust and confidence in policing in the same way that we feel the threat from cyber and data, and actually they're inextricably linked. So I do think there's work to do to bring those two closer together.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any comments on the risk register?
Could I just come back on Stuart's thing on the WhatsApp groups? I mean, my experience in the past has been that social media is a nightmare, and the point I've always made to employees is that the rules that govern the world haven't changed, but the risks to you have because of new stuff like social media, after Cannon Street and all the rest of it. Are we able to use examples like that in a legitimate legal way to say to guys, look, you really can't do this? I mean, do they understand?
They can't say they haven't been told. I mean, okay. The reality is, the boundaries of social media and private chats and the expectations of police officers who hold public office is not on a parallel with what people are expecting necessarily in society. So, the trust and confidence that we need to have to people to behave in a way that respects the ethics, regulatory framework and code of ethics and our values is really clear. The Charing Cross WhatsApp group, I think that's very widely known across policing. It was homophobic, racist, anti-Semitic. It's really clear that this is not what we expect of police officers. And I think, certainly the leadership across the force has made it really clear. And, I've been grateful for the support from the Federation and from Tessa, actually, in terms of amplifying the messages in terms of what's acceptable. And it's just reminding people that we are a police force, and there are, boundaries that go with that perhaps people might stray into differently in their personal life, which are unacceptable. So I think we have made it pretty clear. The recent WhatsApp groups have been, the impact of that's been felt
heavily across the force.
Okay, thanks.
And, you know, the process is there to achieve the right outcomes. And we, you know, obviously continue to make sure that people are, you know, well cared for during the process.
And I suppose there's almost a slight positive in the sense that you could argue if it wasn't for social media, you might not find out about these people, and actually, you know, the damage it does reputationally is horrible, but it's almost good to know that those people aren't part of the force anymore thanks to that, because if you are just using WhatsApp to have a little bit of a moan like we all do about something and it's not any of those categories, I don't think it's ever going to be gross misconduct, is it? So.
Yeah, and although they're all, I think that's a really good point, Brian, and I think they're all there for different circumstances. So we mustn't forget that, you know, one of those groups, actually, it was a colleague that reported the content of that group. So, you know, we have seen this continued rise in confidence. The All People survey has shown people know how to report wrongdoing. We are seeing an uptick in people using the relevant channels to report it. And actually, I think the greatest strength of our own organisation is that people call out poor behaviour, which there's no place for in our organisation, or policing more widely.
Anybody else? Any comments or points? I think the key takeaway here is that the time is almost upon us for a bit of a review of the risk register to make sure it's up to date and giving the most recent assessment of where we are, and some of the elements of it need to be reviewed slightly. So I can leave that to the relevant committees to deal with. Thank you very much. We now have items 5 and 6, which are not quite the same, but they're certainly linked. So first of all, item 5, financial performance. Who's going to deal with this one?
Sure. Okay, so this is the Q1 financial performance update that we had previously taken to Finance, Legitimacy and Performance Committee back in July, but it's restated for period 5, just because of the timing of this meeting not quite being at Q2. We wanted to bring as much of a relevant update as we could to aid conversations. So to recap the source of the in-year BAU pressure, which the report evidently focuses on, it's happening for a few reasons, including some over-programming that we did to the base, in full knowledge that that's our responsibility to manage. But mainly we've got more officers coming in quicker than we'd planned. They're not leaving as quickly as they usually do, and we don't have them in the right places. So where there are proportionately more officers than PCSOs and staff, and more of them are in PSA posts instead of TFL or EPSA. So that exacerbates the pressure through a loss in income, and we can see that coming together. At Q1, the total pressure was 8.3 million on the system, and we brought this down to 4.3 million through a combination of intake management, some proactive work to proportionately fill the funded posts, and some realism on the non-pay where the forecasting we felt was optimistic. And if you look at the pattern of financial forecasting at BTP over the previous years, you do see this pattern at the beginning of the year. So it's important that we made some adjustment for that early. So since then, the plans that we took to bring it down at the 4 million level are firming up, and we will see them reflected in the Q2 forecast. Beyond that, and to articulate the further levers I referenced in my verbal update to FLP in July, you'll see on, I think, page 37 of your packs what those controls are to manage the pressure further and down to base, just to bring a bit more structure to that update. So the controls that you'll see in that table haven't been easy. The plans have included controlling overtime, reducing agency support, scaling back discretionary training that we had against a very tight and overcommitted training budget, along with things like managing portfolio, scaling back some of our transformation ambition, delaying technology and estates works to next year, drones flights, and the new PPST approach. We've also frozen new appointments at the moment for an extended period of time to manage the pay position, which will inevitably have operational implications into next year. So they've been difficult measures, but they have been manageable. We've been really supported by our Force Executive Board and colleagues across the force, and overlaid that with some important recent communications. So everyone is really transparent on how we're managing the budget and what the position is. We're not yet at the Q2, that is imminent. I would anticipate being close to budget as a result of this work. I'd say we're continuing to reflect a cautious risk appetite, It's given us a confident position to begin the business reviews that we'll start to do towards the end of this week and next week with key budget holders across the force before the forecast is prepared and agreed through our Force Executive Board. But we do still remain confident that we're able to manage the budget. The levers are in place as are outlined in that table. We do have further options and controls that we could take. We're choosing not to at the moment, and that's articulated in the report. But we do have those options if we should need for the rest of the year to make sure that we bring the budget in as close to nil as possible.
Thank you, Steph. Does anyone have any points, comments or questions in relation to the finance report that Steph just did?
Hand up from Amir, Chair.
Amir, please.
Hi, thank you. Steph, can I just check the POCA income is 90k on the budget, and I was trying to work out why that would be.
Was that the pocket income, sorry, Amir?
Yes, that's the one, yeah.
Richard, have you got?
I don't know, we'll have to take that one away and
Yeah,
come back
we'll,
in writing.
we'll come back to you on that, Amir.
No problem, thank you. I've just got one other quick one, which is the insurance, legal and claims. Could you, just because I don't remember, do we have our own lawyers or do we always outsource any law matter?
We outsource. We've got companies on the framework that we use regularly. In fact, we're just about to do a meeting this week, I believe, on the current legal services provision, but it is outsourced to companies on our framework.
Anybody else any points or questions at this stage? I think if that's the case, we can note that report and we'll move on to the next paper, please. Ms. Ulysses,
Oh, that was a little bit quicker than I anticipated.
No, I think your paper might generate some discussion.
Okay, thank you. Right, so the purpose of this paper was to present a consolidated view of the combined budget pressures facing the force for this year. And that really came out of, I think it was actually the Appam Remcon when we had the final discussion, and Ron helpfully suggested that we brought this together in one paper. I tried to limit the actual overarching paper. There is a background paper for context, because I recognise that some members slightly newer might have not all the information, so hopefully the background paper's provided some of the detail. The purpose of the paper is in effect to consider three buckets of current financial pressures. The first is the business as usual pressure, which Steph has touched on slightly. Not an unusual position for us to find ourselves in at the beginning of the financial year, but needless to say, as Steph's articulated, some choices that we've had to make, which I would say are not easy for the force, and some of those decisions, the impact of those decisions won't be felt probably until towards the summer of next year, when the delayed, when we would normally expect the intakes to land people for operational policing. Obviously, those they won't land next summer. Buckingham Palace Road is the second budgetary pressure, and I know that's been discussed extensively at Strategy and Planning Committee. And then obviously the third one was in relation to PRRB and the settlement, which was slightly above where we had budgeted for, settling at 4.75% when we had budgeted, prudently budgeted. I think when we compare ourselves to policing nationally, who'd budgeted anywhere between 2 and 2.5%, we had budgeted at 4%. We do, contrary to Strategy and Planning Committee, where it was slightly early then, but we do believe there is sufficient cash without breaching the prudent reporting threshold. And we've got no material breach of the DFT control totals if we manage BAU and manage BPR, particularly if the BPR is managed through the reserves. But I recognise that's a choice for the authority and members. Certainly I'm concerned on the information I've had that if we were to manage PRRB, potentially we would have a breach at that position. So I think probably in the interest of time, I'll just quickly go through those three areas, but then I'll, assume the paper is read and then open up for questions. The forecast, I think Steph has touched on in terms of the control measures, so I won't touch too much on that as business as usual. We're very committed to managing within the budget that's been allocated to us. That there's no change there, and I see that as business as usual for the force to manage that. Buckingham Palace Road, Strategy and Planning Committee discussed the £2 million pressure for BPR, and that's at the REBA stage 4. And just a reminder that the business case was approved at REBA stage 3. This was a project that took time to get into full flow, and there was always a risk in terms of approving the business case at REBA stage 3, particularly I would say with the volatility of the construction industry, and also when we're doing a refit, of course, as members rightly pointed out at the time, you never know what you're going to find until you start to strip a building out. Also, I think there is an added dynamic of we are working with TfL on this project, so it is not entirely our project. So there's some strengths to that partnership, and then there are some things that make it slightly more tricky. You can see that although we have reached the 3.4 million figure in terms of the unfunded aspect of the project, there has been a lot of value engineering, and there's already a 2.5 million cost avoidance through some fantastic value engineering, which has been taken in partnership between TfL and ourselves, and that was illustrated in section 2 of the annex. I would like to make the point that from our position, BPR project is a once-in-a-generation project for BTP. So far, it has, in my view, rightly been managed as an exceptional item funded from cash reserves. And BTP also did provide 2.1 million of BPR spend from the 23-24 core capital programme in order to reduce the budget cost pressure, which obviously we're all pleased that we did that. And then just to summarise the pay settlement, I'm going to emphasise the point again, but I think it was very prudent of us working with the authority, and it was good that the commissioning note for last year told us to put 4% into the budget. NPCC, which is Chief Constable's Council, suggested to forces they put 2.5 into their budget, so we are in a better position than policing nationally, and therefore the cost of this to BTP, you can see from the paper, once we've crunched it through in terms of all of our EPSAs, is a cost pressure of 900,000, circa 1 million. I know there is some sort of discussion about whether the Home Office is indeed actually funding policing, but policing is receiving 175 million directly from the Home Office, which the Home Secretary stated in a letter to all Chief Constables that they saw as being the difference between 2.5% and 4.75%. How that then is then managed across the forces, the detail is still being worked through between the Home Office and Chiefs Council Finance Committee. So they, in effect, are the three budgetary pressures, which when we consolidate those together. So to summarise, business as usual in terms of the force overspend, which is my issue and my Chief Officer team issue to deal with. The unfunded pressures are BPR at 3.4 million and PRRB at 900,000. I could go on, Ron, but I think it's probably helpful to pause and, as a team, we're all here to answer any questions that anybody's got. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Do any of my colleagues have any questions or points they wish to raise, please? Don't all rush.
Willie.
Ian.
Thanks, Chair. I wondered why the Chief Constable has chosen to describe the pay review body award as a separate pressure rather than a pressure under business as usual. Most organisations would take that as within business as usual. You estimate what your pay is going to be. If it comes in higher, it still has to be swallowed within a year, and it's what you do. So I wondered why that had been singled out separately.
Thank you.
Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Right. So I suppose I look backwards, Ian, to answer that, which is, the custom and practice most recently, I suppose, when you look at the 7% pressure from last year, has been to charge that out so that you don't actually reduce the service that you're giving to the public. So ultimately, you know, as an organisation that's delivering a policing service to the public, to consume that pressure would be a reduction in service somewhere. I believe when I look backwards and in time, and we've seen the charge out process happen quite routinely in order to charge that cost out rather than reduce the service of BTP in terms of protecting the railway. So that's why I treat it as a separate pressure. I do realise that, you know, if you look at the civil service, they've been asked to consume the pressure. I also always look at parity to have a look to what is happening in wider policing, and wider policing hasn't been in order to consume that cost within policing. So that's why I've viewed it as an additional pressure rather than a business as usual. But I recognise you know, people will have a different view on that. But personally, I think it's the cost of policing.
Okay, Kenna?
Thank you. On Buckingham Palace Road, I don't know how much of the budget is already committed and how much there is to go, but 1.4 million seems quite a large additional amount of contingency. Can you talk about what the major risks are that we need this contingency for?
Okay, yeah, so I'll probably invite Steph to come in on that, Kenna, but I think where we're at is, as you know, right at the very beginning, when we were doing the refurb and stripping out, the risks are always higher. So we think actually the risk level is reducing in terms of the contingency, because some of the major issues we may well have found through any construction project have probably been identified. It's not to say that they're not there, but we're hopeful that they are. It's a reducing risk as opposed to a growing risk. But I'll ask Steph to come in on the detail for you.
Yeah, sure. So apologies, Kenna. I have written a paper that answered that question and some of the queries from Strategy and Planning Committee. So I think that should be on its way to you shortly. But the contingency we had initially was 15%, and that reflected us being at an earlier REBA stage in our journey. The 1.4 million actually represents a contingency of 9.5%. So that's stating that there is still an element of risk, but because of where we are, because we have done substantially this strip out of the site, our confidence is higher in the spend items that now have come through at REBA stage 4. If I could categorise the areas where I think there is still more considerable risk that would fall into that area, things like security, CCTV, we've still got some outstanding calculations to do and assumptions to make around the pressure of that. There is an impact if the delay with phase 1 limits us from being able to do a straight decant from Albany into Buckingham Palace Road. Any prolonged impact or delay to the programme will hit BTP and TfL proportionately at this point, because purely from a labour perspective. So there are some construction risks around power and data that we're managing. We're in a firm position with technology compared to where we were, but there is still a bit of residual risk around technical spend as we get closer into the construction of some of those elements. So there is still risk. It is less than previously. We are on top of it. We haven't put any contingency bids through yet. There is one, I think, due this week that will due to come through around the CCTV and security. However, we're as confident as we can be that it would be within that 1.4 million limit, and hopefully not touching contingency as much as possible. But we do think it is justified to put that figure in so that we don't have to come back again, reflecting that we are only at REBA stage 5 now.
And just to clarify, Steph, sorry, the 9.5% you quoted, is that of the cost still to go? Is that 1.4 million is 9.5% of the cost to go, or what's the 9.5?
That is of the total cost.
Cost. Okay, that's not very meaningful at this stage, because obviously we've spent, hopefully, spent quite a lot of the money already, and we haven't got so much to go. So what I'm interested in is, of the money we think we've still got to spend, how much do we think we need for contingency? So that's the number I'm most interested in. See how realistic it is.
Okay. I might need to try and work that out.
Come back to me separately on that, that's fine.
Thanks very much. Tricia, then Emir, please.
So there's a slightly low mood in the room at the moment, because this is a really difficult conversation on a really hard topic. And like Amir, I was tempted to come in and have a discussion about what's the difference between business as usual and what's exceptional, because having done massive capital programmes, I wish an overspend on a capital project was an exceptional thing. it kind of really isn't, and you've spent a long time juggling within a portfolio to try and kind of manage these kind of pressures. But I think that's a sort of semantic and pointless conversation. I think the more helpful conversation is to think about where we are. And for those of us who are sitting on other transport sector boards at the moment, these are really, really hard times. The Department for Transport has just launched a voluntary severance scheme in order to accommodate the cost of, including other pressures, the desire to take the cost out of the rail sector and the pay costs on the civil service. And in launching that severance scheme, there is no suggestion that any kind of dimension of service is being exempted from taking people out of the organisation. So I'm not kind of drawing a direct parallel between what's going on here. I think I just wanted to reflect in the discussion about money that anybody who's doing other transport things elsewhere in their working lives is having some really, really tough conversations right now. And I think that's why this is probably a more challenging ask of the board than just a look at the headline numbers would suggest.
Thanks, Tricia. Amir.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask on these somewhat emotive but station closures. Really question for Lucy. How do you, the methodology that you use to continually assess station closures, how closely does that match what the other 46 forces are doing, who are also continually assessing whether stations should close?
So I think it's difficult to do a comparable on that one, Amir, to be honest, because obviously BTP covers 3 countries and has small locations over a large geographical area. We're relatively unique when it comes to that. And I suppose for those of us who've been in policing a long time, if you need 2 people out, for example, at Preston, to have 2 people out at Preston is probably 8 people that you require to be posted at Preston as the accumulating factor with shift rosters in order to do that, in order for us to be working time compliant and make sure that we get people there. I'm not saying it's easy for my colleagues elsewhere, but if you're just looking at a county, it is easier to make choices on where you're going to close your presence within local communities than it is with BTP. I think to give you a flavour, certainly in terms of some of the potential budget settlements that I understand that you're, as an authority, you may be thinking about. For example, a 3% settlement, and I know I'm looking forward a little bit, we would be shutting sort of Carlisle, we would be shutting Lancaster and a couple of other stations. So what will happen is BTP is structured on a model that we would like to get there first to deal with disruption. That's simply not possible in terms of how we are structured in terms of our presence at different locations. So we would have to readjust expectations in terms of the response times to deal with disruption. The data that we look at to deal with that is the frequency of disruption in particular areas. So that we do have areas of our estate where disruption is rare, but when there is, the impact is high. So they are the professional judgment choices that we would have to make from an operational perspective. But we can't continue to have the investment in so many different locations with fewer investment, financial investment. It's simply not possible to do that. I take Tricia's point around headcount. Those members who've been here a longer time will know that my pitch has always been that we should be a force that's digitally enabled and technically enabled to deliver an outstanding service, and we should be in a position where we want to reduce our headcount because that's where the lion's share of cost is. We have no money set aside for redundancy, and equally our capital budget now is totally consumed with cyclical replacement. So the innovation that we need in order to achieve the better technology, digital data and technology, for example, we might be able to shut some of the more remote stations because we could fly drones to be the first responder to that location. At the moment, we can't catch our breath really because we can't move forward in that area in order to reduce headcount. And headcount is our biggest cost in the organisation. It's the same with some of our commercial services. We can see elsewhere people moving to AI, which in the longer term is a more effective and efficient way potentially to drive forward your business. But again, we haven't got sufficient in our capital funding in order to move forward in that area. So they're the choices that we are making. The optimised policing model really is about making sure we've got the right resources in the right locations to deal with what matters in terms of our strategy and what's particularly important for the rail industry. We know that BTP officers getting there first, the return of the railway is likely to be much quicker. But we are heading to a position where potentially the operational viability of the OPM is under threat, and also just in terms of business as usual, we cannot be on the geographical coverage that we've got within the funding envelope that we've got, and we will need to make those operational choices, which, you know, are ours to make.
Okay, thank you. Can I have Paula, then Fiona, then Willie?
Yes, thank you very much. As Tricia says, these are difficult conversations, and we are living in difficult and challenging financial times. And I wanted to recognise, first of all, the work that's gone into the table on page 37, to be able to recognise sufficiently early a potential overspend of 8.3 million and pull the levers to manage that down, I think is exactly what we would expect to see and what we want to be able to demonstrate to customers. And I think the fact that we are a statutory body with an ability to simply pass on charges does mean we have to look at things from a customer's perspective. And so I do think that customers should properly expect us to be able to look ahead for a year, anticipate what our costs are going to be, then they have to pay for them, most of them without a choice in the matter, and they properly would expect us to be able to accurately forecast those costs and manage in-year budget. So I do think that it's difficult for me to make an argument that we weren't able to anticipate the quantum of the pay rise correctly, and therefore we've got to go back. I mean, clearly we did a better job than other forces did, but the fact that we're actually down to 0.2% of our total budget, given what you've demonstrated in terms of your ability to manage within budget, that amount of money, for me, we ought properly to ask the force to manage as business as usual. Now, I'm more sympathetic to the overspend on a major new headquarters. I'm also more sympathetic to the need to, in a difficult financial set of circumstances, invest to save, because that becomes much more tricky when there aren't pots of money that enable you to do that. So that requires more deftness in financial managing. But that is my position on the asks within your paper.
Thanks. Fiona?
Yeah, and I'll echo, I mean, these are never easy discussions, are they? But I think if we do have to bring back to a flat budget, which is what I think we've been directed to do by the DFT, accepting there is probably some provision with reserves to help with the BPR costs, and I think we all recognise that any big construction project at the moment is facing increasing costs because of Ukraine and external events to the UK. I've seen the list, it's on page 48, of the further in-year savings that aren't recommended, but I haven't seen anything that gets us back to that budget plan, excluding BPR or the use of reserves, or how much it can use. That gets us to that, and I suppose that's probably the ask that the authority will have, which is if we have to do something to get us to deliver to budget, accepting the use of reserves, if that's where we decide to go for any BPR consideration, what's the plan? Because we're going to be running out of time. I mean, we're in October now, and so we've only got a few months to go.
I'm sorry, Fiona, I don't quite get the question, because actually there is a table in there that has showed the savings that we've made to deliver on budget, which is in the annex of the paper. So
yes, I'm looking at page 48, Lucy, which is further in-year savings option, which I'm presuming is to get the gap to zero.
Mine isn't numbered for the whole pack, so what page number is that of this paper?
Not recommended.
416.
Yeah, so that one is to deal, so table 1 is around, you know, potentially they are options that we potentially would have, which my professional judgment is that it's just not appropriate to do those, but that is more around to deal with the PRRB settlement and to deal with BPR. In terms of the, you know, managing to budget, that's all dealt with elsewhere. So I don't need to dip into anything else. And I feel like I've pushed that as absolutely as far as we can safely push that while providing a service to the public. This one is if the committee is lended not to support charging out of the PIRB and is lended not to support the charge to reserves for Buckingham Palace Road, the table you're looking at is the only place that we would be able to look. And my professional judgment is that I strongly recommend that, well, I wouldn't be willing to step into that as a Chief Constable. I don't think it would provide a service to the public. And some of these, particularly the training reduction, and some of those choices are not acceptable in terms of creating a safe working environment for our people.
Willie?
Yeah, I guess a lot of the sentiment about what I'm going to say has already been expressed, but when I read the paper, I kind of had to read it 2 or 3 times, because one thing that was promised by Steph was we were going to stick to budget this year. We weren't going to have these discussions. So I was a bit disappointed to find that we were going to have the discussion. And then when I looked at it and I separated the 2 issues, the refurbishment of the new office, I can understand that. And I think we have to find a way to help through reserves and get the right level of contingency, because normally as projects mature, contingency reduces, not increases. So Ken has obviously asked the question, and I think that will be looked at. That takes us back to the business as usual fund. And I then started looking at all the detail that you were providing, which was great. But I'm not qualified to determine, you know, this rather than that. And really, my preference or the outcome of this would be that we agree we have to get a balanced budget. We have to stick to what we agreed. There is no ask further of industry in this year. And difficult, as I understand it is difficult, you have to come back and tell us how we're going to do it.
So if I can come back on that, so I absolutely agree with you. So we would never normally bring a discussion around business as usual to this committee. So that is normally managed through strategy and planning and elsewhere, other committees. We've got the finance committee. So we would never bring that to you. It is you entrust me with a budget to come in and deliver on that budget, and that is what we're going to do. We were asked to provide, you know, obviously the choices that we have to make in there mean that there are less choices available perhaps for some of the other, because if we didn't have some of the pressure on the BAU, we may well be able to use that money in other areas, and I think that was probably the point of the paper. But, you know, Willie, I can absolutely assure every member of this committee, you know, it is our responsibility, mine as the Chief Constable and the Chief Officer Group, to deliver to budget, and that is what we're going to do. But I suppose the bit I would ask members to be slightly sympathetic around is that some of those choices are already very difficult choices. And, you know, some of the options, you know, Tricia talked about redundancy and that, some of that is not an in-year option for us within the force. And that's really difficult for us in terms of, because we don't have like a 3-year financial strategy where we've potentially baked in a pot of money for redundancies, it's really difficult to go to that space. So I think, you know, BPR, you know, I do still think it's a unique project. It's not something that we're doing regularly. And the PRRB, you know, I feel pleased that we budgeted more. You know, there was a directive from the authority to bake in at 4%. You could rightly say to me, what, you can't find 900,000 out of a £400 million budget. You've got every right to sort of say that. But that 900,000 will come back. That is, we are going to have to reduce our service offer as a result. All of the stack of stuff.
I completely understand that. But I kind of feel that's where we are and that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
Abdul, then...
Brian's first before me.
Abdul, then Brian, then Stuart.
So I am sympathetic with the issues that have arisen, especially around BPR, and then ultimately you've got the, you know, I wasn't here to how it was project managed before, so I can't comment on that, but from what I've heard, it has had a troubled start. But then ultimately you come back to the point where it's producing roughly 1.4 million of savings year on year once it goes into place. But then I come back to the point of, you know, if I look at Scotland and the KIMS Commission, they're pushing councils to look at working with, you know, fellow public sector bodies more collaboratively to save, you know, that money, because things are tight everywhere. And I come back to that point, not only about spend to save, what are the projects that we could spend money inevitably to save a substantial amount of money, several million, but then I come back to the point about what do we offer internally that can perhaps not be offered solely internally, but work collaboratively with other public sector bodies to deliver that same service. And I realise that might be, you know, some see it when I've worked for shared services, a loss of control, but I don't think of it like that. I seem to think of it as a sharing of expertise across a wider pool and having a more resilient organisation. But obviously those things will not come in year. They're not going to help you for this year, but these are the things that, you know, need to be looked at for the coming years and see what savings can be realised to perhaps prevent the situation occurring again.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would welcome that. I mean, Hugh and I have had some early conversations just to think about how we have try and move away from this sort of yearly discussion about the budget and rather think more in that sort of longer term around how we can potentially bring in some sort of spend, almost a bit of spend to save, invest to save. I think we do need to do that. I generally am an advocate that policing doesn't need to over-rely on headcount. I think that debate is happening outside of BTP. We've been talking about that with yourselves as an authority for a while. We don't have a desire to just keep necessarily growing the headcount, but if we're not growing the headcount, we still need to have the capability to deal, you know, with the issues that we're faced with, responding to, supporting victims of crime. And, you know, we are seeing a continued rise in violence across the network at the moment. And our sexual offending, you know, this is all work that we are consuming within, in terms of additional demand. You know, we are consuming that within the envelope that we've currently got. I think, if I may, Ron, just with the PRRB, you know, we have had an impact already, and with Q2 very close in terms of its forecast, I do think we probably need to see where that is settling in the trajectory for the rest of the year for the PRRB. Anyway, it's almost too early to make a decision, in my view, on how we deal with that. And I actually think with some of the controls that we've put in place that there may well be opportunities within that envelope anyway. But I think it's just too early to know at the moment in terms of where we are and what are some of the other unforeseens that may well crop up. Because, you know, we always say we'll spend within budget. You know, but we couldn't have predicted the disorder and the cost of that, and I know there's still negotiations with the department on that. You know, I think with, you know, some of the, you know, the unrest that we're seeing at the moment, we are likely to see a rise in protest as we go into the autumn, so that is going to be an additional demand on the force as well.
Okay, thank you. Brian, then Stuart, please.
Yeah, and I suppose for me, some of the irony with this cost discussion is when we sit here and talk about this, we often get industry feedback that BTP are trying to do too much. Now, some of that might be, I suppose, a lack of education around your statutory responsibilities and things like that. But then at the same time, you know, we have some quite specialist stuff going on. And if you look at some other Home Office forces where, as Abdul says, you know, they've kind of merged stuff like firearms, roads policing, they started to merge that. I'm not sure we do a lot of that. We still have, 3 police control rooms in London? We still have, you know, firearms teams. We went to see them in Birmingham who sort of said, look, 95% of our work is West Midlands calls. We don't really do anything on the railway. You know, it's things like that that, you know, make you think, is there some kind of compromise position here where we really do look at, you know, the important stuff, which is the disruption, which is being able to respond to a victim of a robbery or a sexual offence quickly. And I suppose some of that sort of stuff doesn't come out from the table. It feels like maybe some of that stuff Abdul's been talking about, I don't know, maybe we have looked at it, it's not possible, but it doesn't necessarily scream out there. And then I suppose the point around BPR, we're saying 3.4 million, of which 2 million is absolutely necessary, and then there's 1.4 contingency. Is there something that says, well, we go into the reserves for the 2 million, because we know that now, but then there's a conversation at a later date, if we actually get to a point where we need it, it almost feels a bit defeatist if we sign up to the 3.4 right now when we're saying the problem is 2, but that's just my take on it.
Probably if I can work backwards, so contingency planning on big capital spends on estates programmes is good practice. I mean, it would be, I think it would be, for me, it's not appropriate not to have it. I mean, the controls that you may or may wish to place on us in terms of the spend on that contingency might be something the authority want to think about. Yet my only real ask is that anything that is around, any control measures around any contingency has got to be really flexible and it's got to be agile, because otherwise it will just have an increase in cost because of a delay in decision making. So that would be my plea. So I think probably disappointing to hear your reflection on the in relation to some of our specialist assets. I always say, you know, having spent 5 years in counter-terrorism policing, you know, everybody wants a firearms officer when you've got a marauding terrorist at a commercial centre at a railway station. It's more of an insurance rather than necessarily that you're going to see particular delivery every day, and we'll never know what we've deterred by the presence of police officers who carry guns at centres that the National Threat Assessment has said are likely to be more high risk from terrorist attack. So our firearms capability is very much in order to deter terrorists from seeing the railway as a place where they want to undertake an attack. And I think if you look at the National Threat Assessment, you know, crowded places still features very prominently, and they may well support their colleagues, which we would expect them to support their colleagues. But first and foremost, I think it's a difficult measure to quantify, Brian, really, as to whether somebody's been deterred from criminal activity as a result of the presence of firearms officers. We have disinvested in terms of some of our counter-terrorism capability. So that's, I can't think of the annual savings, but it's just under 2 million as an annual saving by having a higher appetite for risk in terms of the investment. So that investment has been used to deal with the increased demand around disruption and violence against women and girls. So we have reused that rather than actually made that as a financial saving. I think in terms of some of the other specialist assets, you know, disruption. Were you at the workshop, the disruption workshop last Friday?
No, I understand it was.
But yeah, we had a good disruption, workshop. I think generally the feedback from industry was that they were unsighted on all of the work that was taking place. So we've definitely taken that away as feedback to make sure that we are sharing that better. I mean, you know, I think it would be useful for probably you to have a sort of overview on exactly what's happening from a disruption perspective. But there is a lot in that space at the moment, and there is a lot of joint testing and exercising that we need to continue to do. But I think, from my perspective, you know, the learning from and the recommendations from Manchester Arena to start to think that we would disinvest in our firearms capability would be very unpalatable for me.
And I know these are incredibly difficult decisions, but I think it is Abdul's point. You know, at the minute, Met firearms teams don't go into our London stations, do they? If BTP didn't have firearms capability, but you had them regularly patrolling, and whether this is viable or not, that's the sort of stuff that I think potentially over the years...
They would deploy in because we have...
They would deploy, but I mean, you know, the proactive, visible stuff, which I think is you're saying the benefit. And I do get these are really difficult, but I suppose if the years progress and we are going to hit budget, we are going to have to look at some stuff that feels really uncomfortable.
I think with respect to both of you, I understand the point and I understand the need for that sort of joint discussion. I'm getting a little uneasy about delving into the details of operation.
Yeah, because that is your call,
matters at the moment. But the point is well made, and I think Lucy understands that as well. And we will look at these things in the fullness of time, but we're talking about a slightly different issue at the moment. Stuart, can I turn over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the wider issue here is a bigger reputational issue for the force and authority, which is that we have to get a balanced budget, because if we don't, there will be a reputational hit with ministers and the DFT. So I think that's got to be the starting point. The Chief Constable told us on September the 8th, when we were at People and Culture, that we were now focusing only on statutory duties and discharging our statutory duties. And yet, if you look at what I might rather irreverently call the slash and burn schedule on page 48, which is in-year savings, not recommended. I've got 2 points. One is, are they all in-year savings? Because not all of them seem to be in-year savings, and the mandate was to come forward with in-year savings. But the second one is, I don't believe that they're all core functions. I mean, if you look at 4, 5, 6 and 7, particularly 6, it references non-core teams. And I just think to ring fence a budget heading of £1.25 million is quite significant. We don't have the information. Now, it's not my job to find those savings, but it's my job to try and understand the rationale for why that is ring-fenced and why it's so unpalatable and why it's not recommended. And so I think that's an important point. And I would say also, on the number 8, I think it's rather odd to pray in aid a piece of legislation that's not even had its second reading in the House of Commons. I mean, it's not got its second reading until probably October, November. It won't get royal assent probably till after Christmas. So I'm not wholly convinced that that is a strong argument for saying that we can't make value judgments when we're looking at a budget saving of 4 million. And my final point is, I think that none of these would be definitive budget savings. They might be reductions, they might be incremental reductions in year, but I think some of the language is a bit overheated, that, our proud ambitions being a learning organisation would end by reducing the budget heading 6. So I just think that there may be merit in the arguments being made that these are being ring-fenced, but we're not really provided with much detail as to why that is the case. I won't get into station closures because I think that's a whole new complex area. Thank you, Chair.
I'm conscious of the time, ladies and gentlemen. I wonder if I might ask the accounting officer if he's got anything he wants to say in relation to this discussion.
Thank you. And I mean, as you might expect, me and my team have been talking to the force over a period of time, and it's interesting to hear the members' views. I mean, I see these as two separate items. For the pay pressure, I think that we must ask the force to live within the budget they've been given for all the reasons that members have set out. I think I feel that very strongly, and I think it's not very clear. It's not a very finely balanced decision. If I put it that way, it's very clear the force should live within its budget, even given that pressure. Sometimes the force benefits from pay awards being lower than we've guesstimated. Sometimes they suffer. Last year they suffered a lot. We helped out. This year, not suffering so much. We should ask the force to manage it, and I think, from what Lucy's saying, the force probably can manage it. For Buckingham Palace Road, it is different. It is a one-off. It's, as Tricia said, the expenditure does rise. We all know that. I think there is an unfinished conversation as to precisely how we might be able to fund that, and crucially the extent to which we need to go back to the department to ask for increased budget cover. If we go back to the department for ask for increased budget cover, that carries all the risks that some of you have said. Even if we had to, we could explain it's a one-off project, and the department does understand these rises, these increases do happen. So even if we have to go back to the department, knowing all the history of last year and what may be coming, I still think it's possible to ask the department. I actually think we might find a way of not needing to do that. But that's for a conversation between Rabila and the finance teams to finish. So my recommendation would be, no, you've got to live within the budget with the PRRB, but we will look to help with the costs of BPR.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues on the authority have any other points or questions they would like to raise?
Just 30 seconds for information, if I may. Kenna brought out the point that the Strategy and Planning Committee were charged with keeping an eye on Buckingham Palace Road. There was the issue about contingency and spend to date and so on, which Kenna's brought out. There was also a problem, without criticising the paper too much. We've done this value engineering, and this is the amount of money we need. Now, if we're supposed to be overseeing this and, to be able to stand up and be counted, we needed more information than that, because really we didn't understand what had been done. That information has now been provided. I only got to see it last night, not a problem. But just to say, in terms of Buckingham Palace Road, we couldn't conclude things a couple of weeks ago, because really we didn't have enough information to be seen to be responsible, if I can put it that way. I think we're getting to that position now.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else of my colleagues? All right, we come to the difficult bit now to draw this to a close and make a decision. And I think I would summarise the comments, and I've listened very carefully to what colleagues and indeed the Chief Constable and our officers have said, and I would make the following points by way of a package proposal for members to consider. The first thing is, I think the authority commends Lucy and her team for the savings and the work they have done to try and clarify a very difficult situation in terms of overspend, and they are to be commended for that. Secondly, I do not believe there is any appetite in the authority to charge out the 0.9 million, and that we need to swallow that, and we will need to ask the Chief Constable to go away and look at that in terms of our current business as usual budget, and recognising that operational decisions in that regard are her prerogative and not ours, and that it's up to her and her team to look at that. But I also recognise that Buckingham Palace Road, as colleagues have said, is a different issue. And I would ask the Chief Executive and the Treasurer to look at the provision of that 2.2 million, I think it is, for the essential work for the capital scheme to come out of reserves or some other arrangement, but that the contingency requested be held by the authority and issued on the basis of appropriate authorisation or requirement to attain authorisation on the part of the force, but that we set in place a system that is not bureaucratic, is not slow, and we get it done, and we'll be advised on that by the accounting officer. What do my colleagues feel about that as a package proposal? I think we're agreed, and that's the way we'll proceed. Thank you very much. We're now due an update on fixing the fundamentals.
Caroline is on the...
Caroline, thank you. Can you keep this short and snappy, please?
Hi, yes, I'll try and keep it as short and snappy as possible. Can you all see my screen?
It's black at the moment. Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. All right, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we've done in fixing the fundamentals. I'm going to give you an overview of where we were a few years ago in technology, things that we've delivered, and what more that we need to do. So when I first started in the department nearly 3 years ago, we were in a really, really bad place. There was no leadership, no direction, no investment in the people, and no investment in the equipment. So in 21-22, the turnover rate for the staff was around 20%. The staff were dissatisfied, no career pathway, no training, outdated job descriptions, and they were working on legacy technologies. So by working for BTP, they were being de-skilled further. There were single points of failure, causing bottlenecks with already inefficient processes, and technology using agency staff, which further demoralises permanent staff, who are spending about 150k a year on day raters. So staff and officers alike were wholly dissatisfied with the service. It would take around 45 minutes just to log on to a laptop or a desktop. It wasn't a gold standard build, so it was difficult for technology to pinpoint the root cause of any of the issues. In addition, all of the end user equipment was between 8 and 12 years old. The back-end infrastructure was even older, so we didn't even have the computing power to support BTP's applications. All of this stuff should be replaced every 5 years. There were frequent P1 critical IT outages. We're talking around 14 a month due to the old infrastructure. And although we had a DR site, a disaster recovery site, no one knew whether it would work or not. So nobody ever switched over to disaster recovery. So the All People survey in 2022 had a result of 87% dissatisfaction with technology, which is the highest negative score in any full survey. So as a result of all of the negative feedback and continual outages, the Chief tasked me to come up with a plan. So that plan was fixing the fundamentals. I presented fixing the fundamentals to the BTPA back in May 2022, and I asked for a £6 million investment over 3 years in both pay and non-pay. So fixing the fundamentals consists of 7 pillars, people being at the top pillar, because nothing can be achieved without our people. Our people were demoralised, devalued and detached from the wider organisation. There were so many calls coming into the service desk because nothing was working. The technology staff were too scared to answer the calls because people were rude to them, so they would let the calls ring out, which would just cause further frustration. The team just did not feel valued at all by BTP. We've got some other pillars here, all key to the success. I can circulate the Fixing the Fundamentals plan afterwards. So what we've achieved. So back in 2022, I undertook a restructure, created 21 new roles. I refreshed all of the job descriptions. Some hadn't been changed for more than 10 years. And revalorised the skill supplements. Again, this hadn't been done for years. So now we have clearly defined career pathways. Turnover of staff is much less. We're down to 8% now. There's more training. We have free Microsoft training, and we have regular PDR meetings. So people know what's expected of them. And we're continually at 100% completion rate for our PDRs, whereas before the department didn't even know what they were. So along with this, we've also got robust performance management in place, with poor performance being challenged, those who are not performing being supported through the relevant stages. So we've got people now incentivised to work hard. I've set up monthly town halls for the department with guest speakers from different departments and divisions to help the team see that they're part of something bigger and to help them be less insular. I've created the Technology Culture Club. This focuses on culture within the department and EDI because that is just so important. And we were recently highly commended at the National Rail Awards for a Great Place to Work award, particularly for all the work that we do around the EDI space. The department are working way more efficiently now, so we've broadly I've reduced the requirement for contractors by 84%. And some of the big ticket technical projects that we've delivered are moving our data centre from FHQ to our secondary location. We now have disaster recovery in place, which will take 4 hours to switch over. Through end user compute, rolled out 2,500 laptops with a gold standard build. Replaced the entire analogue telephony system through the Unified Communications project. So we now have a fully functional digital telephony system for the force, which is integrated into Teams. Upgraded Niche, both the back-end infrastructure, which has never been done before since it was released, and upgraded the front end of the application, which hasn't been done for 5 years. Yesterday, obviously, confirmation from the Police Digital Service that we've got full approval to roll out through the National Enabling Programme. Lots of achievements from a cyber security perspective, which I think James went through with you all last week. So we've delivered lots and lots and lots of things, but along the way we've uncovered many issues which we've had to resolve along the way. But we've definitely improved the end user experience. We've fixed in the fundamentals. The all people survey is now 67% positive for technology, compared with 2 years ago when it was 87% negative. But there's still more things to do. There's still more that I need to do with the data centre relocation. We're running out of our secondary site at the moment, so I need to switch over to our primary site. But this is a really good thing because this will be the start of our proper disaster recovery testing schedule. Need to upgrade ControlWorks hardware and software, much like we did with Niche. I also need to do the same with X. I'm hoping to get that done this year. Working through a cloud data storage strategy to ensure that we're only keeping the data we need, so we're not paying to store data that we don't need. And I still need to remove the last of the legacy servers, so we're up to date in a proper cyclical process, which will mean that we can automate our patching processes as well. There's lots of exciting things that we really want to do, such as robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. We're looking at Copilot at the moment, which is an AI assistant. It's a really, really helpful tool, which could save some money in the long run. But again, there's a lot of work to do there. Also, we need to keep the officers proactive by keeping them out and about and mobile. So we'll be releasing ControlWorks mobile app, Origin mobile app, and single-issue laptops, as well as mobile fingerprint devices. I've got some really big contract renewals coming up, so the network needs to be replaced. This normally happens around every sort of 7 to 10 years. And I'm hoping to make a really big saving here on the network, and you will be receiving a blue folder in December. We're currently out to tender for a new mobile carrier. Again, I'm hoping to save some money here. And in April, we have the Microsoft retender, but unfortunately, this won't be cheaper. All indications so far is this is going to be a little bit more expensive. So I'm still fixing the fundamentals, but doing this, it gives me the time to problem solve, be more proactive rather than be on the back foot. And I'm really grateful for the investment over the past 3 years. But I know that there are other departments that are struggling, which means that I've got the added weight of responsibility in that I have to make every pound go as far as possible for the end users. I've got a restructure planned. I was going to do it this year, but unfortunately due to the budget pressures, I'm unable to do it. But ultimately, that is going to save some money. So the plan is to now do that in April. I've got a couple of bids into the MTFP for next year, but again, I'm just going to have to wait and see what comes out. So I've just whizzed through the presentation. Obviously, time is of the essence, but I just want to finish by saying a huge thank you to Andy Cooper. You've supported me through this entire journey, so thank you very much.
Caroline, thank you very much for that, and it's very heartening to hear some good news, and I think you and your team have done a lot of outstanding work there. Do any of my colleagues have any comments or points? Andy,
I'll just say,
okay.
I asked Caroline to come along because it is a very good news story over a long period, and the point she made there, if you heard it, is that we discovered a lot of things along the way. And where that's happened with a number of other projects, without criticising them, they've tended to come back seeking extra resource. And what's been explained to me by Caroline when I sat down with her for an hour the other day was that they found ways around this and saw that as a challenge, and also that things were far more complex. But the prequel was that when the chief turned up and you saw that results in the survey, was that IT was in a hell of a state, and very wisely the chief got Alex Blatchford, the head of IT, I think, from the Met, to come in and do a quick and dirty and say, what do you think? And he came back and said, yes, it's crap. The best bit of luck we had was that one of the reactions, which is not unusual, is that we said, oh, we're not really resourced on COG to look at this. So we went to the marketplace to try and find somebody, and we couldn't afford them. So that's been a saving over the last 3 years. So it's really good news we didn't find somebody, because we've achieved all of this without spending another goodness knows how much on another senior person in IT. So I think, that was lucky, and the project has just gone incredibly well, as Caroline has said, and the thing she's done with the team, if you meet some of them, they're really very impressive indeed. And great news, but I just think it's a project where they haven't kept trotting back. They've got on with it, and 3 years later, we're looking in really good shape.
Okay, could we have Emir, then Craig, please?
Caroline, thank you very much for that presentation. Very helpful indeed. I just wanted to, as you know, one of our strategic things is to start to use tech better than we do. And I know we've got, as you know, 134 innovation projects and 18 cyclical schemes going at the moment. And I wondered how many of those do you own at the present time?
Off the top of my head, I don't know how many I own, but I'm certainly involved in every single one of them. But I've got several that are within my portfolio.
Yeah, I would say.
Perhaps you could. Sorry, I was just going to say perhaps that can be circulated after, just so we know.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
Thank you, Craig.
Just a thank you. I mean, IT was Dickensian when I came here in 2019. It was actually worse than the Met when I went there, which was quite an achievement. So Caroline and the team have done a fantastic job. A couple of times today we've mentioned the issue around capital and capital money. Caroline said replacing IT every 5 years. You inherited a lot of end date. Probably at some point, we can't do it now. Interesting analysis in that review of the health service, looking at capital spend as a percentage of their total expenditure and what had happened to it. I suspect we'd see similar in policing, but it's probably something we want to look at, so we make sure we're building enough in it. And just, Caroline, a quick one for you. CNC are doing Copilot with Microsoft as well at the moment. They've just started it, so there might be something to learn there, sharing.
Thanks very much. Abdul.
Thanks, Caroline, for that. I think I found it very helpful, having joined in January, to see where we've moved from where we were in 2022 or 2021 to where we are now. But I think I keep on hammering the point. It's only through spend to save projects that you will actually get the sizable savings that you will actually need for budgetary issues that we've BTP have faced. And I go back to the point about the tech. It's important that these things actually come to the authority, so that if there are spend to save measures, we can take an objective decision on them. And through tech, you will save a lot of, I think, money, especially with robotics, where I've seen it and I've implemented it in where I was previously, and it saved a significant amount of resource of individuals being taken out. And it's all automated, and through savings of personnel, you'll actually make those significant savings, because the force, what is it, 80% of the budget is staffing. So, you know, I think that should be the priority, so that we as an authority can see where those spend items can then ultimately lead to savings.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Caroline. Really good presentation. I'd be quite interested to understand the kind of the productivity savings, in the sense if you've actually been able to put a number on that. I mean, you mentioned 45 minutes for people to sort of log on. If you times that across the force network, there's some really good data, I think, that you could pull out that you could use for future business cases. And I think it would be good maybe just to look at, you know, one department and sort of say, okay, from a productivity perspective, you know, what's the benefit that's been realised through this? You may have done it already, but I just sort of think it would be really good for future projects.
The handhelds for frontline officers has been a big step forward.
I'm conscious of time, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody else, any other points they want to raise?
Can I suppose the bit to say is, you know, a huge thanks to Caroline. It's been a journey, definitely. And, you know, I do share Craig's reflections that, I mean, technology was just absolutely woeful in this force. And ultimately, it was disabling us to provide an effective service to the public, you know, even if you look as basic as our ability to take victim statements. So we're in a much stronger position. It has cost a lot of money. And I think that's the point. So, you know, the choices were made to make sure that the investment was there in technology. We've obviously had to pause some of the ambition, which you've seen from the previous item. You know, some of the stuff that Caroline was looking at has had to be paused. I do think it's this constant thing, which I know HMI, you know, he's just reflected on this poor level of capital investment for policing is just meaning that we're having to continue to just deliver a service in a very traditional way, which is actually always why it's always why every year we're saying, look, this is just more expensive, and at some point I suppose I would just ask members to, you know, what are we going to have as the solution for this in terms of the capital, because where we are at the moment with the capital budget, it is literally cyclical replacement. There is no ability for the innovation which we know is out there and that we want to deliver on. Drones is a prime example that we've been, you know, we have been knocking on everybody's door almost with a begging bowl to try and get the investment in terms of the additional money that we have. And fortunately, you know, the operator of last resort, Robin Gisby, has actually just provided us with some investment to help that. But for me, that's no way to run an ambitious transformation programme for the future. So, and I take the point on, you know, definitely showing the benefits, and some of that benefit at the moment is just dealing with this, you know, significant increase in demand that we've got. But it's important that we show that. Yeah.
Okay. Can I just say, Caroline, first of all, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much to you and your team for what you've done. Certainly when I used to go out and visit your frontline colleagues, always first on their moan list was IT. They never mention it now. And I was speaking to a whole shift the other day, and it was everything else but IT. So the proof of the pudding is what they say. So thank you very much indeed for your time.
Well done. Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, bit of good news there, I'm pleased to say. Item 8, financial oversight. Ravila?
Thank you. This is an update paper from the paper that the authority received in January. And this was all around kind of what enhanced financial oversight we can do as an authority. So following the £8.5 million increase in budget cover that we received in 2023-24, there were some conditions that were put up on receiving that money from DFT, and this year we're obviously taking those very seriously, and that is kind of part of where this oversight the reasons for this oversight. Going into the oversight areas in particular, though.
Could you speak up a bit, Ravila? I'm sorry, I know I'm old, but it's going to be helpful. Thank you.
There was one particular, so going into the various enhanced financial oversight areas, the first was around the FLP committee receiving an improved reporting pack in terms of the financial reporting that goes to that committee. And I think we have delivered on that to FLP colleagues. So we have obviously asked for feedback on that. And we're kind of we welcome feedback throughout the year, but we do believe that we have got some more information that will help enable decision making by and oversight by the FLP committee, including around the transformation force on the move. The second area we looked around was SPC and the more information and visibility around benefits realisation. And the pack that we took, the force took to the SPC in September, received very positive feedback in terms of what was presented. So I think that's is a good step forward in terms of benefits realisation, efficiencies, etc. And we're about to report our first return on Treasury's government efficiency framework as well to DFT. So hopefully all that kind of movement in terms of efficiencies and benefits realisation reporting is going in the right direction. And we're also doing a lot of work around London estates and oversight there. To the ARIC committee, we've started to include a lot more information around what key financial oversight activities we actually perform as an exec, including around the various committees, the various boards that we attend, such as Finance Assurance Board, etc., and also areas around any delegation breaches, etc. So that has more oversight at ARAC. One thing that was discussed back in January, I believe, was around having an MTFP working group and whether that was feasible for the MTFP that is currently underway. And there were some discussions, including at the Strategic Finance Working Group in July, and it was felt at this time it was not compatible with BTP's internal processes and might only complicate the MTFP development process. But obviously the MTFP development process still goes to the SPC and obviously will come to the authority. One idea that was brought up back in January was a formation of the Finance Committee, and at that point in time it was decided not to go ahead with the Finance Committee, but instead see if these additional oversight activities that have been detailed here were enough to negate the need for a Finance Committee. And then lastly, this summer there was a Strategic Finance Working Group where we pulled together a set of principles and protocols about how a BTPA should work together. So for this paper, we're asking members to consider the enhanced oversight activities that are already in place, approve the set of principles and protocol that were agreed at Strategic Finance Working Group, and recognise the establishment of an MTFP working group isn't necessarily feasible at this time, but again that can be looked at for next year if it's felt that it would have been beneficial once the MTFP is received in December.
Okay, before we go on to the other bits of this item, 8.1 and 8.2, we have the recommendations in paragraph 4, 4.11, 4.12 and 4.13. Do members have any comments or questions in relation to what Rubila's just said in the recommendations? Tricia.
Just a question, Ron.
Sorry?
I've got a question just on
Emir, hang on. Tricia had just started speaking, so we'll go to Tricia. Don't worry, and then to you. No problem.
Now it's like turned into a competition now. But so Rubila, two quick questions really. I mean, one is, given that the prompt for some of this conversation was a DFT requirement, have you tested out with DFT whether what you're proposing meets what they had in mind when they set it? And then the second question is just on the MTFP group. I'm completely sympathetic to how difficult it is to marry up lots of different systems and processes. But I'm just reflecting on the discussion we just had, which did raise quite a lot of important strategic financial issues. And I think there was a sense in the room that starting to think about finance in that more reflective way to give us a 2, 3, 5 year timeline would be a good thing to do. Can I just look you in the eye and say, how are you going to do that now if you're not going to have this group?
So the first point, the conditions that they set. So we report to DFT on a monthly basis. We have to, as part of our reporting back to them, and that is more granular now. So in terms of that condition, I think they believe it's been met. The first condition around discretionary projects, we have got, I'd say, near agreed definition of what a discretionary project is. I know I'm still speaking to the force about that, but between myself and DFT, we've got to agreed definition, but I know the force have got some kind of queries around that. And in terms of, obviously, DFT not expecting similar issues to emerge in 24-25, that's part of the discussions that we've been having today about how important we realise it is in terms of budget cover. Second part, so the idea that we kind of have a kind of forward look 3 or 5 year kind of finance settlement. I think a lot of that would be, we're coming up to an SR at the moment, so it's important that whatever we do is aligned with the SR period and the SR settlement. Whether we won't be able to do that necessarily for this MTFP because we won't have the full SR settlement for the next at least 3 years. We'll only have next year's, but it might be something that kind of is something that is thought about as we build up the SR settlement for in spring.
Sorry, just really quick. I guess my question was, where are we all talking about strategic financial issues outside the committees?
So a lot of them are in the discussions with the Chief Exec and myself with the force. So we do have these kind of discussions around what we're expecting. I would say that the MTFP commission that the authority members did see was a lot more detailed this year than it has been in previous years. And that was one of the hopes, that having a more detailed commission directive this year would hopefully, as long as that directive was responded and answered, then actually that will give all the information that you need. I think the main thing is that if the directive will be kind of, every point in the directive is like taken in turn. But a lot of those questions will come from the directive.
Okay. Emir?
Thank you. So I'm not quite with the executive view on this, Ron, and I don't know, just as already been alluded, the discussions of today, it's always not just the tactical, it's the longer term, and I feel we're not necessarily sighted on the journey. And I really would want us to consider the MTFP group, but simply having that group with the chairs of the committees we have that is related to performance or finance or something of that nature being involved. Because they have an understanding, because you all sit on this, because they have an understanding of what the authority wants. We've got a view from the internal organisation of what it sees as its direction. I think it can only add value to have, it doesn't have to be onerous, but just the fact that it is there with the knowledge base that it's got, with chairs who've sat on those committees for a number of years, understand the future of what we want. I think it can only add value to the whole process.
Okay, we can look at that. I can get you to look at that. Anybody else? Any points or questions?
I mean, maybe I could just make a point. I would say I feel that of my 10-hour working day, 9.5 hours every day at the moment seem to be discussing money. We are drowning in meetings and providing material around finance rather than actually being able to just get on with it and deal with it. And one thing I probably can offer, just so that people can be assured as to the level of debates, COG is going through its process in terms of discussing its choices for the MTFP. If there are members that would want to come and join us in those COG sessions, I know, Abdul, you come into a COG before and you were quite, I think, surprised at the level of sort of debate that we have. So, if people want to observe those, observe them via Teams, I'm quite happy to do that. But I really, feel quite uncomfortable at the need for further meetings in this space. We are really, have so many meetings. I mean, this is like the second one we've had this week here, isn't it? We had a finance meeting yesterday, spent time together talking about it. Definitely in terms of the choices that we as a COG will be making, I'm really happy if members want to just sit and observe via Teams or join us in any of those meetings, from a full transparency perspective. But I would really just encourage everyone that, we're not going to make the progress that we have if we're just in meetings all the time.
I hate meetings. Abdul, quick one.
I think I would agree with you what you've said, Lucy. I think meetings for the sake of meetings isn't going to achieve anything. It's having those demonstrable aims and objectives and getting to those points is probably where we need to be. And I think I just don't see the need for further working groups and further meetings. And what will that achieve? I'm not quite sure it would achieve anything.
I mean, there's a really clear responsibility for Hugh and I to work together to come back with a proposal that's taken everybody's views into consideration, and we've been talking about that.
Can I also make the point that it is a standing rule, if I could use that phrase, that both the Chief Executive and the Chief Constitution access the many skills and talents amongst the authority membership if they need advice or guidance or seeking a view. It's open season. So that ability is there as well, and I'm sure the Chief Executive and the Chief Constable will use it wisely and appropriately as required during that process.
Thank you for the conversation, because it is, there's definitely a point in here. What I think, in answer to Abdul's question, what would be the point of it? The point would be, actually, was it this side of the table? It might have been all around the table. During the conversation we had on this year, various suggestions and thoughts were put forward by various members about how money could be saved, and most of them were admittedly not for this year. They were MTF. They were the kind of conversations you're talking about now. What we don't want to do is have those conversations on the 5th of December when it is decision time for the medium-term financial plan. And in truth, the way we are now, that's precisely what we are lining up for, I think. So that's the challenge, to try and bring members along the journey without impeding the massive amount of work to get it all sorted out. So there is something here for Lucy and I to work with. I don't want to minimise it. And even if we didn't solve it for this December, then there would, we'd have to keep going at it for next year.
But isn't the risk that then we get further involved than we need to be, and ultimately it's up to the force to then bring a balanced budget, rather than members getting involved as to what X should be done and what Y should be done? I mean, and that's for you, Lucy, and COG to determine, what savings should be made and how that will be delivered operationally. I certainly don't want to be getting involved in those conversations. I don't know, maybe others.
I think I would be comfortable if we just took away an assurance that there's a feedback loop into the conversation from some of the specific things that we talked about before. So what's the learning about over-programming from this year that goes into the MTFP? What's the learning about controls on recruitment? What's the learning about capital programs? I mean, there are some, what's the potential, as Abdul says earlier, for collaboration and shared services? I mean, there are some really, really specific things that are not in-year things that we all talked about for ages. And I think we don't need to have a meeting about them, but we do need to put in the minutes that we're going to pick them up and run with them.
Okay, hold on, I'm very conscious of time. I think we've beaten this one to death. Are we content to approve the recommendations in paragraph 4 of Rubila's paper?
Yep.
Yeah, approved. 8182, still Rubila?
As part of the protocols and the principles, one thing that we did notice around in the Code of Governance that we did need some changes as to what the thresholds that we have for environments and also the descriptions. In the summary of the proposed changes, you'll see that there's both environments and delegations, but we have chosen to take delegations off the table today for approval. So we're just concentrating on the environments. So there's a recommendation for members to approve the changes to the Code of Governance on environments, which is Annexed 1.
So you're being asked to approve, colleagues, Annex 1, and Annex 2 has been withdrawn, as I think you were all informed yesterday. Are we content to approve Annex 1?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Item 9, concessionary travel.
That's me. So I hope that the paper is clear for people to understand. The Chief and ourselves have been talking for some time with different parts of the rail industry about the opportunity for some concessionary travel, both for officers and also for staff within BTP. I feel like, well, I was going to say now is the time, quite possibly a year ago was the time, but anyway, now is the time for, there is a relatively open invitation for BTPA and BTP to take a very clear joint proposal to the sub-board of the Rail Delivery Group, who will consider what is a joint proposal. So the purposes of this paper is to give members a chance to agree on what would be that joint proposal. You will, and I've tried to make it simple in the paper. So really, there's for these purposes, there's two sets of people. One is called police officers, PCSOs, and special constables, and their proposal for them is that they should be able to travel on a network on production of their warrant card or ID card if they're a PCSO, on the understanding that they would make themselves available to rail staff to help commensurate with the safety of the situation. There is, you will see in the paper, an estimated sort of foregone revenue for the industry of around about £860,000 from that. What we are suggesting to members is that we should make the case to RDG and the rail industry that there is more than enough value in having 3,500 potentially people travelling on their warrant cards, such than the 860,000 foregone costs. So that would be the proposal we would take into the sub-board of RDG. The second category is police staff, who are identifiably in a different category from officers, PCSOs and special constables. There, what we're suggesting is the industry standard, which looks like a 75% discount for leisure travel, should be applied to them. We understand that where those arrangements are made within the rail industry, there is usually a method of accounting for the foregone revenue for the rail industry. That method is quite often different depending on which part of the rail industry you are, so we would have to come up with a way of satisfying the industry that the revenue foregone can be met. What this paper proposes is that essentially, the authority has to find a way of compensating the industry, and there's a couple of ways in which it might do it. But again, that would have to be taken into discussion with the Rail Delivery Group subboard. So, on the one hand, a category mostly comprising officers to travel on their warrant cards, making themselves available for duty, which would mean they would not have to pay for any form of travel. On the other hand, police staff to be aligned with the more typical 75% concession is available to staff in many parts of the rail industry, but we will need to find a way of compensating the industry for the 2.6 million, I think it says, of lost revenue. And the question is whether members agree that, and then we will take that into the RDG subboard. My firm view is that were we to reach agreement with RSTL, the RDG subboard, then it would be relatively straightforward to persuade the DFT that this was a good thing to do.
Thank you very much. Andy?
I have many scars, as people will know, on this one. Let's take the easy one first. When it comes to police staff, there are already schemes for Network Rail and TfL on offer. I don't think anything we did for police staff could be any different. The thing to watch out for is that because of the way we are funded, even if we did something clever in year one, in year two, it becomes a money go-round, because actually we charge it out because it's a cost for staff. So we get into an interesting situation. You could say the same is true for Network Rail to an extent, because it'll be part of their cost base as well. So maybe it's not such a problem. On police officers, wherever I've been, I've always said police officers travelling, hot pursuit if you like, with the warrant card when on duty, not a problem. Debate with the Superintendents Association many years ago, we don't like this, we're on our way to a meeting and we end up arresting somebody and we never get there. If you want to be invisible, buy a ticket. So you might say they want in their back pocket the ability to buy a ticket at 75% discount when on duty, but I leave that up in the air. The important point is don't talk to the industry about 100% discount. That is not what we're talking about here. We are talking about travel on a warrant card. Very often the people, if they're not on duty formally, are not in uniform. So the only benefit comes is when they report to the train manager, senior conductor, whoever. I realise there are DOO issues, but let's leave that aside. If they report and make themselves available, it gives you the invisible benefit that the member of staff is empowered to go and do his or her job much better on a train than they would otherwise do if they thought they were on their own. And that's a fact of life, trust me. So what would be needed, I think, for the warrant card arrangement when people are not formally on duty is for officers to sign in blood to the Chief Constable that they understand that to travel free on it, they may not be on duty, but they are available, and therefore they're not, as it were, on holiday permanently. It's not a freebie. They've already declared their availability, even though they're not on duty, to the rail industry. And if you do that, I don't think you have a problem. And it also, I think, would help with the HMRC arrangement. So I think on the warrant card, if you're going to extend it to at all times, you need to formalise it a little bit, whereas I don't think you need to do that when people are actually on duty.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
End of homily.
I'm happy with the recommendations. Sheer complicated topic, been going on forever. We just need to put a recommendation forward, I think. Just building on Andy's point, I was going to make a similar thing. It's a great thing until it goes wrong. So it's really good until you kind of, potentially kind of could have an officer on board who kind of helps out. He's off duty, but he's been drinking alcohol. So I think we've really got to think through what are the rules around this, all the guidance notes in terms of if we're going to do this, certainly kind of under A, then what are the rules of engagement? Because if you don't have that clarity up front, it's almost like we're putting our own officers at risk of kind of getting things wrong. So if we don't set the rules up, so we need to put the framework in place. Is all I'm saying.
Anybody else?
Kenna's hand up.
Kenna, then Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, the arguments seem relatively straightforward to make for the officers, but on the staff, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Are we saying that if we were to put this proposal forward, given that we would not ask the rail industry to fund it, we're effectively accepting another 2.6 million of cost pressure into our budgets that we've already been talking about that are very stressed? We are accepting another 2.6 million, albeit we might get the staff to contribute to that in some way. And how would we evaluate the benefits of doing something like this to doing something of the very many other things in the chief's portfolio, things you would like to do but doesn't have the cash for?
So that is the proposal, and it could be reduced, as you say, if staff contribute to it. But yeah, that's the question.
Could I just jump the queue slightly?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I'm not quite in the same space over that with Hugh, and Hugh does know that. We have discussed it beforehand. So what I'm asking is that we are treated in the same way as everybody else within the rail family. So I don't entirely agree with the reflection of how this is accounted for in the rail sector itself. So I think that that's something that would need to be discussed at the next stage, Kenna, rather than I'm certainly not sitting here saying we would accept an additional £2 million pressure. I'm really clear that this should be dealt with in exactly the same way it is dealt with for the rest of the rail family in terms of the accounting of it. And I think that's what the next stage of this will provide clarity of when it goes to that group. Because I don't think it is entirely straightforward. I think it's, as Andy's probably articulated, it's a really complex area. Home Office forces, some of them have a different approach to it, but we're not trying to align ourselves with policing. We're trying to align ourselves with the rail family, and that's what I think I think there is a third option, which is there shouldn't be a pressure on anybody's budget because we should be treated in the same way as the rail family are. Which actually,
but is that direct loss of revenue to the rail companies?
It's not how the RDG articulate it to us. So I mean, the lift from the RDG, the ticketing guru, is basically that no one covers the shortfall. It's just accepted as ticket revenue, albeit discounted in the same way that a customer using a rail card would a reduced price for their ticket. So I think for me it's a really complicated area, and I mean I support the paper because I think it's sending it to the next stage where the experts are in the room who will look at the accountancy issue for the industry. But what I would support is that we should be dealt with in the same way as the rail family in terms of the accounting of this decision. If I can answer the question about police officers as well. I mean, most of us in this room have been, travelling with warrant cards on trains for 30 odd years. You have a duty to protect the public, whether you're on and off duty. You make an informed decision as your ability to deal with that, whether you've had alcohol, not had alcohol, whether you're with your family, whether you're not within your family. I can give an example where, we as a family were travelling with, young children, and we ended up dealing with a very difficult sex offender on the train. You've got to make choices about how you deal with that as you would do whether you're on or off duty. And personally, I think officers are very good at that. What we're very keen on is that your warrant card is your ability to travel, not a separate pass, because then you are identifiable to the train crew because that is your ticket, your warrant, your British Transport Police warrant card. And I think it's important because I think there is a lot of confidence that comes to the train crews when they know that they've got warranted people on board. But I know Sean's going to probably want to raise a couple of points.
Before you do, Sean, let's have Fiona and then Tricia and then you, Sean, please.
Just to give some context, obviously, so it is loss of revenue. We're working with the RDG at the moment about leisure travel for TfL colleagues, so it's in the multi-million, so we'll probably abandon that. So I think there's a difference between leisure and return to work. I think the other bit as well is the piece that we'll probably just need to accept in Andy's piece is it's taxable as well. So it's a taxable benefit, so it's worthwhile just understanding that for everybody. So even where the rail industry gives 75% discount, that's taxable. So for individuals, so often it's done through a reimbursement scheme as well. Probably just worth noting that as well. But no issue with the paper going the next stage. I just think that we should absolutely be anticipating we will need to fund this. And I don't think it can be a funding that then we just assume is passed on.
Okay. Tricia.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point. I mean, I kind of realise I'm getting confused, and maybe, as Andy started off, because this has a long history, but we seem to be sort of drifting into asserting that there isn't a revenue loss here. And I think that's, so we're slightly confusing, is there a cost versus who should pay the cost? And I thought the analysis was clear that, as Fiona said, there is a cost. And that's a separate question from who should pay it. And it's entirely possible that some parts of the industry will choose not to chase it down, but that's not to say it doesn't exist. It does exist. It's just not being accounted for. So I was also happy with the paper. I did feel there was quite a lot of meat to be put on the bones of the staff proposal. I wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of us finding money given the conversation we just had, but I'm happy for it to go to the next stage. But I don't think we should undermine our credibility in going into that conversation by not acknowledging that there's a revenue loss.
Just for clarity, I'm not saying that I'm not having an opinion about the revenue costs. What I'm saying is that from me, we haven't got 2 million to fund this. Yeah. What I'm saying is that I would like it to be treated in the same way as the rest of the rail family. I get the point, absolutely, Tricia, that then there is, where is this loss of revenue versus the benefits that you're going to get. I mean, you know, there is a benefit if Alistair and I or Sean are sitting on a train, you know, and we can tell you every month about how we interject and deal with stuff.
I was going to go to Sean and then Andy.
Thanks, Chair. Just picking up again from a point of view in relation to that wider police family, we've had discussions already today to remind us to refocus on where the railway police, we often have the discussion, are we a police force that polices the railway or the railway police? We very much see ourselves as the railway police. We pay into railway pensions, and that's our position, that we should be treated and considered the same. In terms of, no doubt a question, is this the right time for industry in terms of the potential loss of that revenue coming in? We don't actually see any change in that position from our rail colleagues. Only last week I conducted a resignation meeting, regrettably, with one of our most experienced and committed public order commanders, who has been headhunted by rail industry into a security manager job, and that package that they have received is first-class rail travel for themselves, their husband and their children, 3 children up until the age of 24. So those schemes are still available in terms of that railway piece. Only this morning, in terms of comparability, as I was coming through the barriers in Essex, Essex colleague was coming the other way, showing their warrant card because of the schemes that they have in place there. So I think this is absolutely the right time to make sure that not only do we have parity in relation to railway colleagues, but parity in relation to a lot of the schemes that Home Office forces have already secured.
Okay, thanks. Andy, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on Fiona's point, for rail industry employees, it's not true that it's a taxable benefit. For TOC staff, it isn't. It goes back to a ruling from 1983 with HMRC. So if you're a TOC employee, it's not a taxable benefit because there is no marginal cost in providing that service to employees, whereas it's not the case if you take the Network Rail staff, because in fact any third party, it is a taxable benefit. If we're trying to pursue the no money position for police staff, it'll be interesting to see what happens with when GBR really gets into its own, because it's hard to see a distinction between Network Rail employees as part of the rail industry and the rail family, because effectively they are at the moment, even though they're at arm's length commercially. But when everything is in the company, I can't. That would be the angle I would play if you wanted to try and do it as a freebie, because I can't see when we're in GBR there's going to be an exchange of cash. It wouldn't make any sense. It's a simple money go round then.
I mean, the national bodies, you're right. So, I mean, that's something that Mike's sitting in the back there. I mean, you have probably had all the engagement with RDG, but, you know, looking at how this works for RDG and how this works for Network Rail as two national bodies is our parity point that we've been having a look at. And we've certainly done all the evaluation on the tax liability, all the things that you've talked about, Andy. I've heard from Mike, but there's been a lot of consultation, hasn't there?
I'm conscious of time. Let's take Brian, let's take Abdul, and then we will break for lunch and we'll take the next item immediately after lunch. Crack on.
Yeah, and I think that point on GBR is really valid, and you know, GBR is going to have to take a view on what they do in the rail industry and the rail family, and as Lucy says, you know, it's almost how do we make that strategic representation to say whatever you do there, we want to be part of, and if they then do levy a cost on that, obviously we'll have to look at it, but you know, it's that strategic influence, because this is probably the biggest opportunity with GBR to get beyond the stalemate and actually get a position in it. You know, RDG might cease to exist then, I think rail partners will go, but I guess the question is, have we got that plug-in at that level to try and influence and then see what comes out of that?
Okay, Abdul.
Very briefly, I mean, I'm in two minds. You know, you've got GBR coming online, and is it worth now pushing this forward when you've got GBR coming later down the line? And what you might have is have this discussion, and then falls through. You know, you've had that discussion, it goes somewhere, and then you restart the conversation again with GBR. So you've got wasted energy having tabled the discussion and the proposals, etc. So that's one point I'd make. And the second point, isn't the easier proposal just to say initially that officers, you know, on the production of a warrant card will be given free travel, and then that's it, you know, whether it's for leisure or otherwise for work, and then park it there, and then try and push forward with the other proposals of police staff, etc., and see where you get to.
Right, okay. Any other comments or points? Are we content, given that there's a long way to go on this road, to approve the recommendations of paragraph 9?
Yeah.
Yep.
Done. Thank you. Let's break for lunch now, and then we'll deal with item 10 immediately after lunch.
How long would you like to break for?
Okay. Rubilla.
Thank you. So we're taking an update of the new charging methodology to this committee. You last saw an update back in June, I think it was, and since then we have sent out letters to the industry, some consultation outcome letters, just letting them know what came out of the consultation, some responses to that, and we also gave them an indicative idea of what their charges would have been under the new methodology compared to what they were for the past 6 years. We also had 2 industry feedback sessions where we went through in more detail the outcome of the consultation. We went through the actual charging methodology in more detail as well. And after that, we actually put a test charging model onto our website for them to have a look at, get more familiar with, and they could actually see if they could replicate what we were doing internally. Because of the fact that obviously for past years we've had, the budget they know, but also the fact that it's the metrics are published, and so they should be able to get access to all the information that we will be using in the new charging methodology. Those feedback sessions were well attended. I think for a lot of people, they just wanted to understand how the model would work, so we put some information onto our website in terms of the model, but also the slides itself. We've also had an external review about the model, about the charging methodology, in terms of does it meet the principles that we wanted from this piece of work, the model itself that we've built, how, just kind of testing that against best practice, i.e. Treasury best practice. And there's quite a few points that came out of our external review, but we addressed all of them apart from 3, and the 3 remaining points we've addressed in the paper as to how we're approaching those remaining points. We've also looked at the PSA, because we will need to make some changes to the PSA to accommodate the new charging methodology, and that is currently, we've had legal advice on the changes to the PSA, and that's currently with DFT, who are reviewing it to then go up to the Secretary of State for signing. We have had some discussions with DFT in the last few weeks, and their legal team have just raised some questions about exactly what industry engagement we have had, and we've addressed those points, and hopefully we will get to a point where the DFT team are comfortable with presenting it to the Secretary of State. Following that, we will be looking to introduce new charging methodology, issue the new PSAs, see kind of exactly who in industry does and doesn't come back on the new PSAs, and then we'll come back to this committee with an update of those steps. So what we're asking for this committee today is just to note our progress to date, note the next steps that we've recommended, and if there are any comments from the authority, we can take those on.
Thanks very much, Rubilla. Does anybody have any points they wish to make or questions they wish to raise?
Right. Interested, Rubilla. When you look at the winners and losers in terms of the changes from where they are now to where they're likely to be, if you stood back from it, does it make sense?
Mm-hmm. I would say yes. So, and that was actually, we've done some work around incorporating passenger kilometres, and this is kind of through a lot of the work that we did with Andy, who's supported us quite a lot around this, as to what metrics we should be using on this. And if you look at passenger kilometres as opposed to some of the other metrics, it does make sense in a lot of the commuter trains into London. We are seeing some shift in costs to those kind of commuter operating companies in London. So there is a slight increase in costs to Network Rail, but given the work that we do around disruption, etc., you would expect that. Quite a few, it's a very few, but there's more than a marginal cost difference actually. And we can, we have all that information if members would like to see it, and you can see kind of who's actually, where as you say, the winners and losers. For the main ones, there are some open access where there will be some increase, but I think that's some of that is because potentially under the old model there was maybe an artificial kind of decrease to their costs just because of the way the methodology worked. But again, in terms of percentage, it might sound a lot, but a lot of them aren't necessarily that much in terms of value. The big one I would say would be Network Rail, where they are seeing an increase.
Okay, anybody else? Questions or points? I've got Fiona's got a hand up, then to Andy, please.
I think this has really moved forward, so well done. I know we've been talking about it for some time, and to get broad agreement, I think, is probably something we should celebrate. I was just going to say is, the people who are the losers, who are probably going to shout loudly, to how we just make sure we balance that feedback with the rationale and reasons why. It's going to be really important, but I think this has probably not been the easiest thing to do, so well done.
I would, in kind of response to that, some of the people who, where necessary, it's the actual operator who are potentially a loser as opposed to a winner, a lot of them may be involved in a group. And actually, when you take the group as a whole, which is, you know, quite a few operators, then that picture might actually change in terms of the individual operator.
That's a good point. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really great. I was reasonably comfortable before we did the final refinement with the regional bit in, and I was never quite sure about that, but Hugh and the team pulled it, and I think it's turned out to be absolutely right. And it's a much better proposition now, as I read it now, with that regional dimension in rather than the crime stats. So, full marks to you, I think.
And Abdul?
It's maybe a question you can or can't answer, but I'd be interested to know what the percentage of the losers, what percentage increase they're looking at in terms of, you know, the sums, and you know, you can follow that up afterwards.
Yeah, we can provide you all that information, and as I said, all the operators have actually had letters which have said, displayed the last 6 years and compared both the current and what would have been under the new charging methodology.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, then can I draw your attention to paragraph 5 of the paper and the recommendation in paragraph 6. Are we content to approve the recommendation?
Yes.
I think so. And Rabila, well done to you and the team.
Yep.
The work's been, I know it's been a lot of work, and I seem to think you're in a good place with this, so thank you very much indeed. Board effectiveness et al. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper before members seeks to do a couple of things. First, to give you greater confidence in how we plan for and present to you issues for decision, particularly those in correspondence, and we seek to do this against the backdrop of the Board Effectiveness Action Plan that you adopted in June. Giving you that assurance, we hope to move towards a position where we can present issues to you that are non-contentious or more routine in correspondence, and therefore ensure that more strategic discussion can take place in your formal meetings such as today. If you are content with that, there is a modest amendment to the Code of Governance outlined at page 90 in red text. And finally, in the background pack, there is a state of play on delivery against your Board Effectiveness Action Plan at Appendix 2. A modest start, but more activity to commence ahead of your next meeting in December. So any questions, I'll be happy to take.
Open. Anybody? Any points? Tricia.
So really happy with the proposals. Thank you very much, Alistair. I just wanted to kind of encourage you to keep innovating, because sometimes innovations are going to land first time and sometimes they're not. But there's always ways in which we can use process and technology to do business more efficiently. So keep going.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I think the one thing you need to note is that more decisions will be done in out of committee, and just be aware of that. And you know, we're in uncharted waters to some extent. So if any of you have any concerns at anything that we do in terms of that, then raise them immediately, please, so that we can deal with them. But apart from that, if you're content to approve the recommendations in the paper, good bit of work, Alistair. Thank you very much indeed. Policing plan performance, Alice.
Thanks, Chair. I'll give a summary of 2 parts: policing plan, crime performance, then disruption and delay. The graphs that you have within the papers cover April to August, end of August 24, compared to same period last year. Overall, you'll see it's a fairly challenging picture at the moment in both realms for crime and disruption. We've recorded 8% more crimes this year compared to the same period last year, up to 35,000 offences just over for that period. The main driver crime-wise, you won't be surprised to hear, is theft of passenger property. Within that amount, over 10,000 of those crimes remain theft of passenger property. We're doing a lot of work, as you would expect, in that realm to try and reduce that through crime prevention, but also a lot of work going on in B Division, for example, to try and match lost property with colleagues in TfL to what is reported as stolen property. But it does remain a challenge for us, and again, we want to try and avoid, where we can, putting a huge amount of resourcing into what is an issue I think that can be dealt with mainly through crime prevention. So that's the overall crime rise. Robbery, which I've spoken to you at this committee about before, which is a significant concern as a high harm offence, particularly for our young people travelling on the network, is down 9% on the same period last year. 74 less robberies compared to the same period last year, but we're into that seasonal piece at the moment where it's beginning to rise. We've had the back to school period, we're going into autumn nights, and this is where we're going to see some more challenges. The divisional commanders have a plan around that. Serious violence, although we're recording a 6% increase compared to last year, the number of solved crimes for serious violence is going up, i.e. our solved rate is going up, but I do have some concerns in this area, particularly in relation to the sort of really high harm offending. So we've actually had 6 homicides this year on the rail network compared to 2 for the whole of last year. We've had 22 GBHs with knives across the 3 divisions this year, and 6 other attempted murders. So I've commissioned, with Chris Casey leading, a review of the serious violence control strategy with a focus on partnership input in that realm, and that will report in 3 weeks. Officer assaults, we're seeing a slight decrease on last year. I know Ron's raised concerns about this previously. Slight decrease of 23 crimes, and the solved rate for that is rising slowly. A lot of the sort of gap in solved rate from the sort of 75% you see here to 100% is around CPS charging decisions or individuals returning on bail. And social behaviour, a reduction, which is a good news story across all divisions, of 5%. It's around 210 incidents year to date, which is positive, but that's offset by some increases in public order offences that you will see within the graphs as well. Stop and search, we're doing less this year than we were last year, but nonetheless our find rate remains high at 51% year to date compared to 45% on last year. And in terms of the way that we're recording our stops, self-defined ethnicity, where we had a fairly significant figure over the last few years, has dropped to a low at 13% of those stop forms not having self-defined ethnicity. It's a 3% drop from the previous year, but in the right direction, if that makes sense. Crime recording timeliness, I know there's some members here who've got specific interest in this area. For priority crime, for sex offences and robbery, we're sitting well above the 90% mark, slightly below for serious violence at the moment, and we're taking steps to address that. And for overall crime, the figure sits at 75% within 24 hours at the moment. There's some challenges around the violence against women and girls agenda, as you'll have seen. There's some rises there. There's some rises in sex offences as well. There's a lot of work going on in that space, led by Sarah White, reviewing the control strategy.
Sorry to interrupt you, Alistair, but the rise involved reporting. There's a lot more confidence in reporting now, is that?
Well, there's absolutely. I mean, not only confidence, but the channels by which you can report are multiple. So we're getting, whether it's Railway Guardian app or the 61016 or more, we're getting more routes into reporting. Transfers from other forces is always another area. So single online home provides the biggest route, of course. But it is a concern, and I've said before, whether we ever reach a true baseline of reporting, because those confidence levels is questionable, but that's only got a shelf life, me saying that, and I do think, we're trying to eat into some of the offending. We've got a really good little team managing offender management at the moment around prevention orders, who've done a fantastic job. We're pretty good in that space now around making sure the courts are helping us to get prevention orders, and we're doing more work with industry to try and get the civil orders to keep these individuals off the rail network. Weapon-enabled offences have seen a slight increase as well, and you'll have heard the serious violence bit that I briefed on already. Hate crime, you'll see rises this year, and hate crime towards railway staff as well. We're seeing some increases in. Some of this, of course, goes back to last October and more. I expect we may see a little spike over the next few weeks, based on international events, quite potentially. We'll keep a close eye on that. We're pushing hard for CID and network policing to go and get outstanding offenders who still haven't been swept up, and there is quite a backlog of those at the moment, but we're working hard to try and get that list down. I'll stop there on crime and go on to talk about disruption. Trespass still remains the primary cause of delay. 54% of all primary delay minutes this year are due to trespass. We've seen some pretty impactful trespass incidents in the last 2 months alone, particularly in the southeast. And overall, we're seeing a 5% increase across the network. Primary disruption minutes up by around 26% compared to last year. And when we examine these, we're seeing some real challenges in getting our officers not only to the scene quickly, but also getting access to scenes as well at some points. Handback times for non-suspicious fatalities at the moment are at 106 minutes. And if you look at some of the data there, you'll see that B Division 97, C Division 105, D Division 130 minutes, which, you've only got to have a couple of those on C and B, and it really knocks the whole thing out of kilter. We did have the disruption and delay workshop on Friday that I know many colleagues in the room were at, and I think had some really good conversations around what does the future look like in that realm. One of the actions, there were many, one of the actions that we took away from that was to do a review by BTP on the control strategy for disruption. Sean presented on a new fatality management and PIP procedure for the future as well, which we hope will make some small marginal gains overall in the way that we deal with this. But interestingly, just before I came into the meeting today, I spoke to our inspector on the disruption team, who, in examining the last 12 major disruption or impactive disruption incidents this month, had managed to identify 416 minutes within those 12 incidents that we could give back to industry through examination. So, there are some small margins that we're looking around what is within our gift to control and what can we put back into action on rail. So it's a challenge for us. I think, we remain stretched in some of the areas on C and D divisions in particular. We're around 28 suicides a month, 28.2 or just over at the moment is what we're running at, which is a slight increase from last year. So the challenge with trespass and suicides at the moment is immense. And we're really, from point of parade in the morning or in late turn and night duty, the sergeants, inspectors are really looking to get the teams out as best they can to where the disruption hotspots are or where forward-thinking wise we think we may need to be, which is a really difficult balance to deal with. And overall, if you look at the sort of demand picture, when we were designing the optimised policing model for this year, which we're still doing, as you know, we'd built in a sort of overall demand increase for this year and last year of around 10% calls for service, crime increases and more, and we think we're exceeding the upper control limit on that. So it's a real challenge for us with resources at the moment. I'll stop there, Ron.
Thank you very much. Comments, questions? Brian and Abdul?
Yeah, so no, I think the disruption stuff obviously hugely welcomed by the industry. The rise in suicides and stuff like that, it'd be interesting to know how that's taken its toll from a welfare point of view on the officers that happen to go out to that. Are you seeing any effects from an absence or
Yeah, like sickness rates have risen this year, interestingly, definitely have risen by an average, I think, potentially 3 days each, I think.
And an increase to psychological referral.
Yeah.
So then I suppose on the crime stuff, I know we're saying it's going up. I don't know if you know, but I assume that is a national picture, and actually our increases might not be as big as some other places, and we know that data's quite skewed by London, don't we? So, I guess the Met have probably seen even bigger increases than this. Is that fair to say, or we're not sure?
Yeah, sort of it's the B division crime demand piece is growing, more than most years actually. And last week I was with 2 Met DACs, 17 ACCs from around the country talking about these issues. London is facing real challenges, the same challenges that we're seeing here, whether it's serious violence or acquisitive crime, and they're working hard to address that. But actually a lot of the Home Office forces are seeing similar rises. Some are managing to buck the trend in acquisitive crime, for example, but mostly rises. But London is the driver for us, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I think just one final call out is the Optinvert. That seems to have done some really good stuff in terms of lowering that. I know it started to spike up a bit, but that seems to have, and that seems to have been really well organised, and even with the industry and stuff, there's been dialogue, so I think we should commend that.
Yeah, and we're looking, I mean, certainly the learning from Invert in terms of the sort of Triforce working, partnership, TfL and more, we're looking to sort of apply it elsewhere within all sex offences and more.
Okay, Abdul, then Fiona, please.
Just a few points. I think it's quite welcome to see police assaults are down. I think that's always a very positive thing. But the 2 points I'd make are about hate crime. So you've touched upon it, Alice, in relation to the international backdrop. Whilst all hate crime is serious, with the increase, are we looking at the severity of it? Are we talking in relation to, verbal stuff that's being said, or are we moving towards, assaults with a hate element? Where do we sit? Where is the increase sitting amongst the severity of
Yeah, I mean, all of the hate crime offences we'd regard as serious. However, the levels of seriousness, and the majority of verbal abuse. The assaults that we're seeing, thankfully, are not serious assaults and are more at the sort of common assault and threats end of the business, but nonetheless hugely unpleasant for sort of travellers and staff. So, given the volume that we've seen increase-wise, we are applying resource to it and trying to plough our way through the numbers that we've got. And of course, you know that the majority of these are reported after the fact. So it's a CCTV rewind for us. And more, where we've got staff body-worn video, obviously it's a lot easier, but certainly the majority of these are reported after the fact, and therefore that sort of investigation has to continue back down the CCTV viewing route.
Okay, and the final point is around trespass and the delay of handing back, to the talks. So you've got C and D division above target. I'm quite interested in D division specifically, and C division as well, because they're both above target. Are mechanisms being had, obviously, in discussions internally to try and reduce that? And what is the actual cause? Why is it, say, in D division 130 minutes, whilst in B division it's 97? Because that's, when I go about, especially in Scotland, that's typically what is being raised about the handover times and the lengthy delay. And I appreciate, it's a complex area, but I'd welcome some commentary around if you've got that, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's I would say 90% of the challenge is the geography. And, if you look at July, for example, this year, the D division fatalities north of Inverness. You've been there yourself, the resourcing levels there are minimal at the best of times. So, the SDOs and the force incident managers will send more than one resource on occasion and basically see who gets there first. So, there's a couple that we had north of Inverness where we sent people from Aberdeen and Glasgow just to, really push down the minutes to see if there was who would get there first and shave off the minutes. I mean, that's the reality of it. But it's potentially an hour and a half or more travelling time to get to some of these, and that's the difficulty.
And so you've got that element. Is there perhaps, and I know it's not Police Scotland's job, but if you look at that element, if you're sending somebody across and it's 4 hours, and Police Scotland have somebody there that's 10 minutes away, but obviously it's not their job.
No.
I accept that.
I mean, you would expect we do pass the messages from Control Works to Police Scotland. We do. They receive them where they've got resources. They will help us, but not all. They're as stretched in the north as we are. If I'm really honest with you. So it's not just D division; it's C division as well. We will seek assistance from other forces. I think last year, 23-24, I think around 6% of our overall call demand was dealt with by Home Office forces. Which is not an insignificant amount. On many occasions we arrived subsequently and took over the call, but around 6% of demand was dealt with by Home Office forces. and some Home Office forces were keener than others to help, and those that weren't, the Deputy Chief Constables in those forces were quickly on the phone to us. So we've got a good relationship with most forces, in effect.
Okay, thank you.
Is that 6% just on fatalities, or is that generally?
No, generally.
I think that's pretty good.
I think that's very low, isn't it?
Very low.
It's well, it's a lot of calls.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Fiona, then Paula, please.
Hi, I think this is great data, so thank you. Alistair, again, it's really good to see how you're tracking this. Just had one question. Obviously, I've seen that you call, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that the violence against women and girls calls or aggressions going up because there's been so much campaigning on it. But the question I had is how much are now self-reported via 61016 and how much are coming from rail staff reporting incidents happening on the network?
Fiona, I haven't got that data in front of me. Vast majority, I mean, it's a small percentage from rail staff, and the majority remains single online home, followed by calls and 61016. I mean, I can bring that back, but I couldn't answer that, I'm afraid, data-wise.
Yeah, it would just be good to see. I mean, it's a really powerful tool, probably the most powerful tool that you have in fighting crime, and it'd be good to see whether or not it's in a dip-off since it launched, or actually whether you're seeing improving trends of people using that.
On that issue, just very briefly, obviously, very good news that it's being reported, violence against women and girls and sexual violence, but the solve rates are still quite low, aren't they? I mean, essentially you're saying 9 in 10 of sexual offences are not going to be solved, which is merely an observation, not a criticism as such. But is it your experience that the force needs to do more intelligence-led work? I mean, are there repeat offenders responsible for a significant amount of that you'd like to keep off the railway? Or is it opportunistic crime responsible for all those, the vast bulk of those cases?
I'm going to say it's a mix, but there is a huge amount of repeat offending and a huge amount of serial offenders. This morning at the daily management meeting that I chaired, Intel was given an update on sex offences, and overnight alone they'd identified one male within the South East who was responsible for 3 offences within that 24-hour period, just by visual identification and grabs from CCTV, looking at descriptions, going back to the CCTV. So there are a lot of people who are committing multiple offences. Where we obviously convict them, we get a prevention order and keep them off. How good we are collectively as industry and police in identifying these individuals when they do come back on at the end of their sentence is another matter. But I do think there is a lot more work to do around offender management. Yeah, the CCTV bit, facial recognition bit, for example, would be huge for us. And of course, there is a mix of offending here. We've got, when you look at our wanted missings, wanted on warrants failed to appear at court, we've got a mix of people that we're chasing, we've got a mix of people that are abroad. So it's an interesting challenge, but I think we're probably, as you've described it, Stuart, I think we are the best of a bad bunch in terms of the league table of detection. So we're actually at the upper end of UK policing for sex offence detections, but we're nowhere near where we should be, and it is volume. A lot of this is volume. So.
Thank you. I echo the thanks for the report, which I think is really helpful, and also for you bringing it to life in this way. I'm interested in Trustbus, because it seems to me that's an area where it's volumetrically so significant. It's on the way up, and it is something that the customers really care about. When you get those sort of overlapping kind of priorities coming together, at what point do you say, okay, we're going to have to try and solve Trustbus in a different way, we need to make a step change here? I mean, is that what the discussion you had on Friday was about?
Yep, there was a discussion.
And my follow-up question, sorry, to kind of carry on, those are sort of things I think you were talking about earlier, Lucy, where we can design either investment or technological solutions, and we need to find a way of escalating the priority of those when they are going to make a big difference to a big number that's rising and matters a lot to our customers.
So on the Trustbus front, as it stands now, it is prioritised by our senior duty officers and force incident managers when the call comes in. So it's at the top of the priority. They understand the impact. That's the brief they've had from Sean. So they will they will deassign from other calls to go to a trespass.
Sorry, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job.
Absolutely.
No, I was asking a slightly
what I'm
different
coming
question.
to, certainly in terms of the discussions that we had on Friday, how does it look different? So we're going to do a review of the control strategy. You know, there's some fairly strategic pieces that we discussed. You know, we want to probably do more enforcement than safeguarding. I know it's a difficult one to swallow, but, you know, a huge percentage of trespass is young people. You know, a lot of the time, majority of the time, they're not being prosecuted, they're being safeguarded, but actually, do we actually have to flip that now and look at how we go ahead with prosecutions? We've got to do some work with the CPS, we've got to do some work with the Ministry of Justice, and ultimately, given that this is a sort of UK PLC impact, and there is a huge cost attached to it, it's probably not recognised to that degree within the court system, for example. So how do we change that?
Probably if I can add to it. So I think so there is something about using our investment and working more collaboratively with the department with the spending review coming up. So if you look at sexual offending particularly, there are huge gaps with CCTV across the network. I mean, it's an unforgivable position that you could be, you know, a lone female travelling, you know, indecently assaulted, and the reason we're not prosecuting is because there is no CCTV. And I feel in 2024, for me, that's an unforgivable position. So it's, you know, refreshing to see the focus of government on violence against women and girls. We would say that the CCTV proposal that's been probably proposed historically as a collaborative bid in through the spending review should be re-energised and should feature as part of the spending review. And I think you know, there's a responsibility for us all to push for that. I think the second bit in relation to trespass specifically, you know, it is volume, it is young people. There is an education programme that's done with sort of Network Rail and others, which is, you know, I mean, we can all remember probably going back in our days, you know, visits to school telling you don't go on the railway tracks. So there's been a lot of work in relation to that. I think the challenge for us is it still takes time to get there. It still takes time to walk down the tracks. And actually, I would say the Fosbury flop moment is the drones. You know, to be able to, you know, launch a drone to fly from a remote location, beyond visual line of sight, quick ones down, there is no trespasser here. The railway can still keep moving. And I think I alluded to it earlier, it's so difficult to get the investment to look at this for a whole network solution, and there's too many pockets of people, in my view, looking at the drones. We will probably be having our first flight, hopefully this side of Christmas, just into the new year. But for some of the rural locations, particularly with trespass, that would make a demonstrable difference. And we know that the savings on Schedule 8 payments, almost the first 2 drone deployments, it's paid for the entire programme. And there was a whole business case that was presented. It went to the department and it wasn't agreed as a project a couple of years ago, so that's why we're doing it in the way. But I think you're absolutely right, Paula. These are the things we need to push for strategic investment in order to be able to have something better as a solution. Also, when I started, I think 14% of recommendations post-incident debriefs, in order to deliver on the prevention aspect that Alistair talks about, only 14% were ever enacted. That's risen now, heading to about 50%. And Alistair's been pushing quite heavily, you know, we need a strategic lead within the railway to work at making some of these choices, because you've got you've got little pockets of money being spent rather than how can we pull it together and have the greatest impact to reduce trespass. So I think they're the two areas we need to do differently.
I'll just finish with that. It's not Christian as in the room, but I think the drones bit from a sort of trespass point of view and general disruption point of view is hugely, I mean, Lucy calls it Fosbury flop moment, but it will be a game changer. And I think, you know, 2 years ago when I came here, we had the opportunity to build a business case, which we did. There was some innovation funding in the DFT. We asked for 5.1 million, I think, over a 5-year period. That would have given us literally the launch. Unfortunately, it wasn't seen as a priority, I don't think, at that point. Obviously, Rail Minister's talked about VORG and disruption as being the priorities for rail. We're hoping that innovation fund we can tip into. The other bid we put in was for CCTV. It's a little bit more money than that, and again, that wasn't supported. But, you know, we talk about that investor save bit and, you know, headcount. These are the two areas, quite honestly, where we can make the biggest ground, quite frankly. So I think as a partnership, that's something for the future.
Sure.
Chair, just one point I think that it would be useful to share with members that came out of Friday as well, and it's about choices as well for our partners in the rail industry. We average each day 84 trespasses onto the rail network. At the point of every single one of those calls, that's a failure in terms of we've lost part of the network and we're in response mode. We know from our analysis that 61% of all trespasses nationally is from the platform onto the track. The remaining percentage is away from the railway industry. And our point is that no trespass occurs on the concourse, no trespass occurs on trains, yet that is where our partners constantly, daily, ask us to place our officers onto concourses, onto trains. So it's a shift in terms of prevention. That is where we've got to make the real difference in relation to trespass.
Anybody else got any points or questions? Brian?
Sorry, one last point. Just, I think, Alistair, you said, a lot of the stuff on Friday was a surprise to the industry.
Yeah.
Is there worth, any value, Chair, in maybe a breakfast brief where, as members, we get a bit educated on that to help us sort of, pass that back to the industry at some point?
More than happy. I mean, I think for those that were there, that you'd be cognizant of the fact that, particularly Adam Swallow's presentation, which was the disruption improvement plan, followed by Sean's fatality management plan. I was really surprised by the volume of senior people who said, I had no idea BTP did that volume of work. And it then caused me to question around our sort of engagement, at what levels. But I think the more we can do of that to provide reassurance, the better. So whatever format the authority thinks or would recommend for that, we'll push forward. We've asked the divisional commanders, though, to develop more of a corporate approach on each division to engagement. So sort of, I think Ron would call it command briefings, directors, regional managers and more, who are you engaging with once a month, this is your opportunity, and down to tactical and operational level. I think at the moment we're doing a lot of the operational briefing to sort of midway up industry, and it's not reaching the top at the moment.
I think we can make a note, Alistair, that we'd like a breakfast briefing. Certainly it was quite an eye-opener last Friday, the workshop, and there's a lot of information there about a lot of the work going on in the background, which is extremely important work and core to the forces business that I think members would be welcome to hear a bit more about, so we'll get that sorted. Any other points or questions on the report? Are we content to note it?
Read.
I mean, I'm conscious that behind every one of those statistics there's a story, and not all of them are good stories, but certainly well presented, and I think that's the sort of information that we need is very helpful for us, so thank you very much for that. Thank you. We now come to the highlight of the day, where we have the Chief Constable's and the Chief Executive's reports sequentially. So, Lucy, over to you, please.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just pick a couple of bits out of the report and then try open to any questions. But it would be remiss of me not to start by saying we have had a number of high-profile events since the last update, and we are continually thanked by Home Office colleagues and through particularly the Home Office as well for the support that we give to some of the national operations that have been taking place. But I suppose the one that's probably the hardest one to have to talk about was on Saturday the 7th of September, where we had Special Constable Gary Blackburn, who was stabbed whilst out on patrol at Preston Railway Station. I would say, thankfully, the attempted murder of a colleague is not something that I have had to deal with very often in my career, probably more often than I would have ever liked to have done. But Charlie and I visited Gary and his family at his home shortly afterwards. So we went up on the Monday evening and met with Gary and his family. So he was very uncomfortable. He was stabbed right at the top between, in the nape of his neck, which was just above where the body armour is, which we know is always a vulnerable point for officers and PCSOs that are on patrol. He was in very good spirits and very pleased to be at home in the care of his family on the Monday evening, having had really good surgical support at the hospital. And it's fair to say he was overwhelmed with the messages of care and support he's received, and he has just sent in to me his thanks, which we've just put on Viva Engage, because he wanted to thank all of his colleagues. What I was particularly pleased to hear, although unsurprised, was his reflection on the kindness that he'd had from BTP, and as a family they very much described it as feeling like a real true family support. And the work of Rachel's team in particular, just to make sure that all the relevant support was available is really important, and that will continue with the provision of physiotherapy and the appropriate support for Gary. I suppose what I'd also like to do is publicly commend Sergeant Stuart Moore. So we, when we got up to Preston in the early evening, we bumped into Stuart, who actually detained the offender, who was subsequently charged with attempted murder and is currently remanded in custody. And Stuart, for me, just exemplified the level of bravery that officers have to deal with. So he needed to detain the male who's still carrying a knife at the time. And obviously the risk to those in the vicinity was extremely high, not just rail staff, but the station was really busy with the BBC2 event that was on. Without question, Stuart's actions to detain that dangerous offender prevented further harm to people within that location. And Stuart was really positive about how effective captor spray was, because there was no taser present at the station. So Gary is recovering, and I feel really pleased to be able to report on that. Just probably picking out a couple of other pieces. So just in relation to performance, you have heard from Alistair, but I would want to just emphasise the point that disruption remains a very key focus from us. We're very keen to push this joint industry response to do something a bit different, and it was helpful to chat to Diane yesterday just about how we get a stronger and more collaborative response to dealing with disruption, and just echoing Ron's point, the disruption workshop I think was well received by everybody who attended. Just quickly reflecting on estates, I'm not going to talk about BPR anymore, you'll be pleased to know, but the estates team, I think it's, for me, they work really, really hard. When we say team, that makes us think like there's a huge number of people. We have a very small number of people that are working hard across 3 countries to make sure that we have a cost-effective, modern and inclusive estate. So some of the choices we have had to make for our BAU budget management you will have noted in that paper, have delayed some of the investment to improve the facilities and the places where our people are working. And we have had to triage that, but again, they're tough choices to make, because some of those conditions are not one that either we as a team or I'm sure the authority would want people to be working in. Important just to reflect probably that the Department of Transport have appointed Mighty again as their integrated facilities management service provider. So the new contract, which we become part of, starts on the 1st of February. And although they are currently DFT and BTP's existing provider, we have been assured that the new contract is expected to improve facility management services. So we will keep a keen eye on that to make sure that it is delivering some of the improvements that we really needed to see. I think some people are going for a visit to BPR after the committee, but again, I would encourage any member that does want to go, if you probably come through the executive, we can facilitate those visits to have a look. The drones discovery project, I know we've touched on drones a few times, but we are making good progress in relation to that. We are using the legislation and pushing the boundaries of the legislation so that we will be using it flying under a state flight definition, which will enable us to fly beyond visual line of sight. I think I would say for the project has a lot of interest from a lot of people in relation to Home Office policing, in relation to the rail industry as well. So we are looking to make sure that we put on some team sessions so people can understand what the aspiration is and what the delivery timeframes are in relation to drones. It would be remiss of me not to just pull out the optimised policing model. If I have a nervousness about anything, it's around our ability to deliver the optimised policing model. And by that, we are going to have to make some critical choices on go or no-go assessments of the optimised policing model and its interdependency with the MTFP Commission. So that is really important. And we want to work with the authority and make sure that you are fully sighted on that dependency between the MTFP settlement and the viability of the OPM. There's been a lot of discussion with industry, had a lot of positive feedback. But if we are not going to be able to have a go on that programme, then we will need to pretty much call time on it relatively quickly. So we will need to make sure that members are fully sighted. Alistair's been doing the detailed scenario planning to just understand the scale and scope of the impact and the affordability of all of the scenarios within the current MTFP Commission. The inspection plan, I think Hugh touches on it a little bit more in his report, but obviously we have reached a position in terms of this year's inspection programme by HMIC FRS. The key bit I just wanted to draw out that obviously it is important for us to ensure that we do have adequate inspection audit as well. And Hugh and I are working on that just to make sure that you are getting the updates through the various committees on some of the work that we are doing, because obviously that inspection will be pushed back into next year. And finally, just a couple of things really. The professional standards, I know Stuart, you touched on it earlier, but we've currently got 35 officers suspended and a further 24 restricted across the force. So we've got 59 people who are unable to undertake the role that they are employed to carry out. Alistair reviews that position every 28 days. And in addition to that, we've got 116 professional standards investigations in total. I will probably pause there. I would just like to mention the All People Survey. I feel really proud of the All People Survey, that at a time, when I think people are finding lots of things really difficult, to have a 65% engagement from our workforce in our survey, I think is something that we should be very proud about. And our engagement index score, which was based on the 4 questions in the objectives and purpose, actually increased by 2%. So I think for us, we'd obviously always like to see that increase being greater, but again, some of the challenges that we're facing in the force, I think that that's a moment for us to take a little bit of pride in knowing that our engagement index score is improving, and actually our workforce are engaged with us in the discussions that we're having going forward. And finally, Paul is on leave today, but I wanted to take this opportunity to publicly thank Paul for his dedication and commitment to policing over 34 years. He has, as you all know, had a huge passion for safeguarding the most vulnerable in our society and for tackling violence and intimidation against women and girls. And I think he's made a real impact, and particularly to have BTP giving evidence at some of the select committees has been a really important moment for us as a force. So we wish him every success in the future, and I know that he leaves a very strong legacy, not just within BTP, but across wider policing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Any points or questions for the Chief Constable? Yes.
On the optimised policing model, why does the discussions or the outcome of the MTFP for 25-26 almost threaten the viability of the model? Because I always thought the model there was parameters, and based on these parameters it was recommending, or it was suggesting, the amount of people that you require at the different locations.
Well, it's exactly that, Willie. I mean, it is very much dependent on policing numbers and shift cover and the viability of keeping places open. So we've got a number of officers that we've sort of aligned to divisions, subdivisions and hubs, and then overlaid what we think are the most productive shift patterns. And, I think that's been some difficult discussions around shift patterns, because we know that we've got to change our shift patterns if we want them to be the most productive and give the public and the industry the service that they need. So, but again, all of that is dependent on police numbers, and any sort of cut to the headcount would mean that certain locations would become unviable, and we've sort of mapped that out and modelled that out across
But
divisions.
the model's a help, is it not? And that the model would be a help, and that it would help you explain the consequences both to the authority and to the involved stations about why you're having to do what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, if anything, the model's going to be more important going forward, because if you take the impact of drones and you take the impact of technology, then we are going to have a different look and feel to the workforce that we have today.
Yes.
And there will be then difficult decisions about where we put people and what stations are viable and not. Yeah.
I agree with you.
Oh, well, that's good. That's an easy question, then.
Can I just build on that? 'Cause, I mean, I've been through it and I think it's very good. I mean, I think there's a bit of work to be done to explain why 40% is right, but let's leave that. Have we done a sales, because you're wanting to use it immediately, I understand that, because why wouldn't you? But for example, we've got a new Secretary of State, a new policing minister. To go to them not seeking money, but to help them say, if you're managing policing, this is a useful tool, and don't go in with the hard sell. I just wonder whether, you know, you could grow support for this sort of thing, which ultimately would help the funding.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you've had the opportunity, but I would have thought that was worth a tilt.
Well, I think that we sort of developed what was accepted as a sort of accurate modelling tool to build the budget, which was a capacity planning tool. And we know that, you know, we're the only force that's done that. We know that the College of Policing want to sort of nick it off us. We've patented it, and it's ours to use. So there is that element. So we've got an evidence base for our resourcing plans. The work that's been done, I will mention a name, Steve McKechnie, who's a police staff member here, who has a bit of a guru on shift patterns and cover, has done some exceptional work to look at how we maximise cover rather than shift patterns at venues. All of that is pretty high-end stuff around project management. So it is there if we get the opportunity, Andy, to promulgate the good work that's been done, if that helps the budget.
I would have just thought that sort of soft sales pitch would be worth a try.
Well,
with a new government, and because you're helping them to work out how to think about how much they want to put into policing.
Those discussions are certainly underway all the time. Yeah. Anybody else?
Please help.
Lucy, you highlighted in your paper that the scores in relation to PCSOs had gone down. Is that have you highlighted them because that is a matter of concern to you?
I mean, yes, it's a simple. It does worry me because I mean, I suppose there's a few of us been in the room on the journey with PCSOs, and I actually think PCSOs are really valuable. And you know, I know that, you know, in some areas of policing there is a debate about whether the affordability of PCSOs, but from my perspective they provide the stability within a community, whether it's the railway community or whether it's communities outside of the railway environment. So it does worry me. I think the aspect for PCSOs is they always worry about redundancy. So, you know, I think from their perspective that they probably feel more fragile in the organisation as opposed to officers. So it does worry me. It's something that Rachel and I have talked about, and we want to try and get to understand that a little bit more, because I think when you get announcements, perhaps like the Welsh Government in terms of some of the reductions that they want to make, immediately that starts to destabilise workforce that basically could be considered for redundancy. We as a Chief Officer Group really recognise the value of PCSOs. So I think that perhaps the anxiety levels and the engagement doesn't reflect the reality, but we've got some work to do to unpick that. I don't really want to add anything, Rachel.
Yes, just we are trying to get beneath why PCSOs are less engaged, because it seemed to really vary across the division. So I'm actually meeting with Sam, I think is on the call, from the TSSA later this week to discuss it from their point of view, to see if through the trade union they've heard any particular viewpoints, so that we can put an action plan together of how we might address the feeling of disconnection that's evident. But that's why the People Survey is so useful, because it helps us to understand now and look at different aspects of our workforce and then take action accordingly.
Can we note the Chief Constable's report? Thank you. Hugh, you're going to stick to headlines?
I'm going to stick to headlines, thank you. So I might do better than that. I'm going to stick to the appendix. So I've... Anyway, the report is the report. I'm very happy to answer questions. Drawing on what Alistair introduced, you know, the ambition to signpost more clearly decisions that will come to you in correspondence. That's a bit I'm on. So I propose to include at the end of every report to the full authority an appendix like you have here on page 110 of your pack, which simply lists the decisions which we plan to put to you over the next 3 months. Now, you know, I don't know whether there's enough detail in there for you, because some of it's a little bit in code, but of course the more detail we put in, the harder it's going to be to read. But what that's signalling for you is there are actually 5 decisions during the month of October we will be putting to you, and then 3 more by December. And the point really is just to support Alistair's efforts to use every opportunity to signpost what is coming, to give people, members, a chance to express an early interest if there's a particular subject you're interested in or might be worried about, and then just to, I don't know, up the pressure a bit more. When that says October, quite a few of those are imminent in October.
That's this month.
Yes.
Or put another way, this month, yeah.
So anyway, that's the bit I'd pull out, if given the...
Any questions or points on any aspect? Yes?
I would say thank you. I think that will be helpful. I mean, the level of detail to me is fine, and I think that gives members sight of what is actually coming. So I certainly thank you for the efforts that have been put in, because I think that will help some of the logjam that we know has occurred previously, or the consternation or unhappiness. Thank you.
Well, the test will be whether we stick to it, but I'll say that for you.
I agree, it's super helpful to signpost the really obvious point. If any of these approvals have an interdependency with the in-year financial position, super helpful if that could be flagged very, very clearly. Either it's in the list of things that would be rescheduled, or there are assumptions made about affordability in here.
I'm assuming this table will go on BI, will be updated.
Yeah, there's a full, so it already is, but there's a fuller version separately on BI, which would take you a little bit further ahead. And I think Alistair will always be receptive to innovate different ways, just as Tricia said earlier.
I think the only one point is if something's coming or a number of things are coming, say maybe, you know, a couple of days in advance, you would have that advance warning and the deadlines. But I think you already do that anyway. So, Thank you.
Are we content to note the Chief Executive's report?
Yep.
Thank you. We now come on to the minutes of the various committees. First of all, I'm assuming you've all read all the minutes. They're in the background packs. Financial legitimacy and performance.
Yeah, shall I just give a very quick overview? So I think in terms of the finance stuff, we've already talked about it here. You know, virtually no appetite for not meeting budget. I think we've done that quite a bit already. Some of the technology stuff's really good. Alistair, you've already mentioned stuff around the facial recognition that could offer huge opportunities around certain offences. Talked about victim care, in a good place, but there's plans to sort of improve that further, particularly around getting that victim feedback through surveys, etc. And I think we've already touched on the legitimacy stuff, particularly around stop and search, and you know, the sexual offences stuff having a bit of a time life to relying on the, you know, more reporting is coming from more awareness. So we just have to keep an eye on that. So they're probably the main bits, and then, as you say, 4 minutes in the pack.
Any points on that, colleagues? Thank you. Strategy and planning?
Yeah, most of the time is taken up on three areas. Buckingham Palace Road's one, and I've made the point that we asked for a couple of things to be worked on again to give us more assurance about the position, and that's come in, was certainly shared with me last night, but is available now, I think, for the committee. Early work on the MTP was updated. Steph did a good job on that, and certainly picked up the issues around CPT and OPM as things to consider. And then we had the first initial of a new version of looking at plans and benefits that flow from them, which I think was quite successful and was quite well received by those on the committee. Those are really the three big things we had last time.
Thanks, Andy. Any points or questions on that? Thank you. You'll have seen the minutes of the Joint Appointments, Remuneration and Appraisal Committee. I'm not going to go through those in public session, but does anybody have any points or questions relating to that committee? Thank you. And then we have the People and Culture Committee meeting, which followed on from that meeting. Nick Hawkins, of course, is not here. I don't know if any of you have any points you want to raise in relation to
Tricia is Deputy Chair.
I can do it. So Nick's not here, but he's here in spirit, and his mission of working in really close partnership with Rachel to reinvent people and culture continues. So we had a shorter meeting this month, mainly focused on people survey, but we're continuing to take an interest in TDRs, and we'll bring that back to the full authority in December. It's a big issue for us. I think generally we're keen to have a very data-led approach to this committee, and working closely with Rachel to help inform the forthcoming refresh of the people strategy.
I think it's fair to say that the People Committee is getting crunchier.
I think that's the goal, yes.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Any points or questions? Thank you. Scottish Railways Policing Committee, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things I'd highlight. We obviously had the dinner the night before, and there was a debrief of that, which is in the minutes for you to see, really highlighting partnership work, BTP with various organisations. Also in partnership work, I'd highlight the industry voice section when we had Strathclyde Passenger Transport Authority along to talk about antisocial behaviour issues. And then the other thing was we had a new risk product to tell us more about specific committee risks to discuss, and that was very much welcomed by members.
Okay, thank you very much. Any points or questions for Ian? Audit and risk, Kenna?
Thank you. Just a couple of points. We spent a bit of time talking about various aspects of fraud work that's ongoing. For members' awareness, the Public Sector Fraud Authority are currently undergoing a review of BTPA. We're submitting evidence. We'll get something back from them probably in November, I think. It's likely to be a sort of report of our good points and less good points, rather than a sort of a straightforward rating. And then on the recent alleged fraud, where remember the staff has been arrested, we received a good update from Steph on the Gold Group work, looking at the causes of that and the additional controls that have been put in place to make sure those things can't happen again, both controls and governance measures. So we took some assurance from that. And then finally, on the internal audits, we received the final report on the risk management internal audit, which looked at all the improvements that had been made to risk management, concluded with a moderate rating. And one of the sort of notable recommendations was that we need to do more to define what joint working between BTPA and BTP on risk management means, which was alluded to earlier.
Okay, thank you.
That's it, thank you.
Thanks, Kenna. Any points or questions for Kenna? Thank you very much. Is there any other business any of my authority colleagues wishes to raise? Andy?
Yeah, I did. There was something that really impressed me. You'll have seen, if you read everything on BI, 12th of August, there was a letter from the Chief, although I suspect somebody wrote it for the Chief, even though she'll have a great input.
Steady on, Andy. Yeah, I do like my
Maybe it was all your good work. I think you'll be brave enough to say it to the Policing Minister on BTP and forthcoming legislation. I thought it was a really impressive statement of the important stuff that really should be, taken into consideration. I don't think I've read anything that good that's gone to government, in recent years. I thought it was really impressive. I don't know who wrote it, Sean.
Who wrote it?
Chief Constable.
That's a man with a career.
But I really, really did think we set out our case incredibly well. Really good bit of work.
In fairness, we had a lot of support from Johnny, who's not here, and Katie, so the two of them worked really hard, but we worked across the force to get all relevant feedback, so it was pulled together with a really strong collaboration from everybody.
If anybody hasn't read it, it's on BI. Have a look. I thought it was really good.
Thank you.
Okay, we've now come to the point in the meeting where we undertake a meeting evaluation, unless there's any other business anybody wants to raise. No good. Nope. Meeting evaluation. Anybody want to say anything about how the meeting has gone? I know it's gone over time, for which I apologise, but we're nearly there. Everybody has been stunned into silence, Alistair, about how well the meeting was chaired, or something.
Well done.
So, okay, thank you very much. No comments on that. We're now at the point where I need to exclude the public from the meeting so we can go into private session. So I would ask members to vote. Shanez, do you want to stay? If you're welcome to stay if you wish.
I don't mind. I don't want you to...
No, it's up to you. You're welcome to stay.
All right. I'll stay then. Thanks.